The rain on Aurelian did not fall so much as it drifted, a shimmering mist of acidic silver that coated the soaring towers of the Undercity in a slick, dangerous sheen. Cade liked the rain. It made the security drones glitch. He slid down the 40-degree slope of a maglev train conduit, the magnetic soles of his boots sparking against the damp metal. 3 meters behind him, a spherical enforcement drone shrieked, its red optics cycling rapidly as it tried to acquire a target lock through the atmospheric soup. Cade grinned, the expression tight but genuine. He tapped the localized scrambler rigged to his belt. "You are going to have to do better than that." "Tin can," Cade muttered to himself. He reached the edge of the conduit and jumped. For a heart-stopping second, he was nothing but falling weight in the neon-drenched void between megastructures. He fired his grapple line mid-air. The cable hissed, bit into a rusted gargoyle on the adjacent terrace, and swung him through a shattered stained glass window. He landed in a roll, coming up with his pistol drawn, but the room was empty save for dust and old data stacks. He checked the drive in his pocket. It was still there, humming with the encryption key for a corrupt magistrate's offshore accounts. Easy money. Well, money. Nothing was easy on Aurelian anymore. The drone outside buzzed angrily, scanning the wall, then drifted away, its logic circuits deciding the pursuit was too resource-intensive for a petty data thief. Cade exhaled, wiping the silver mist from his forehead. He slicked back his dark, wet hair and checked his reflection in a pane of broken glass. He looked tired. The charm was still there, in the crooked line of his jaw and the bright, reckless eyes, but the edges were fraying. He needed a drink, and he needed a payout that would last longer than a week. 3 hours later, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the dull throb of a cheap whiskey hangover in the making. The Broken Spire was the kind of cantina where the smoke was thick enough to chew and the patrons were mostly criminals or people hiding from them. Cade fit into both categories depending on the day. He sat in a high-walled booth, nursing a glass of amber liquid that smelled faintly of engine coolant. Across from him sat a figure wrapped in a heavy synthesis fabric cloak, hood pulled low. "You came highly recommended," the figure said. The voice was modulated, stripped of gender and tone. "I aim to please," Cade replied, leaning back and swirling his drink. "But recommendations do not pay my bar tab. You mentioned a job, a big one." The figure slid a data chit across the scarred table. It was heavy, gold-plated, 50,000 credits up front, the client said. 500,000 upon delivery. Cade whistled low. That was retirement money. That was buy a moon and tell the Alliance to go to hell money. He picked up the chit, flipping it over his knuckles. "Who do I have to kill? The Emperor?" "Steal," the client corrected. "Not kill. You are going to steal the Soul Blade." Cade froze. The coin stopped moving. He looked at the hooded figure, waiting for the punchline. When none came, he laughed, a sharp, barking sound that drew eyes from the nearby tables. "The Soul Blade," Cade repeated. "You want me to walk into the Temple of the Blade, past the elite guard, past the energy fields, and snatch a weapon that is arguably a myth? It is not a myth. It is a fairy tale for frightening children," Cade said, dropping the coin back onto the table. "Don't touch the sword or it eats your soul. I have heard the stories. It is an overhyped relic used by the Council to keep the superstitious in line." The client leaned forward. A pale hand emerged from the cloak, trembling slightly. This was not the tremble of age, Cade noted. It was the tremble of terror. "The Ascension ceremony is in 2 days, the client whispered. "The weapon will be exposed, the shields will be lowered for the ritual. If you are as good as they say, you can get in." Why? Cade asked, his humor fading as he saw the genuine fear in the stranger's posture. Why do you want a haunted sword? That is not your concern. Cade studied the figure. This person was terrified, desperate, and offering enough money to solve every problem Cade had ever had. He looked at the credits on the table. He thought about the debt collectors hunting him in the rim sectors. He thought about the leak in his boot and the taste of coolant in his whiskey. Make it 600,000, Cade said. And I want half now. The client hesitated, then nodded. Done. High above the grime of the Undercity. The Temple of the Blade sat like a pearl in a setting of obsidian. It was a place of silence and terrifying purity. In the inner sanctum, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and ancient incense. Lyria knelt on the polished floor, her breathing shallow and controlled. She was tall, her skin the color of moonlight, marked with bioluminescent patterns that swirled across her shoulders and down her spine. Her eyes, currently closed, were silver, with slit pupils that betrayed her non-human heritage. Before her, suspended in a lattice of humming white energy, hung the soul blade. It was not metallic. It looked like a shard of crystallized void, dark and hungry, trapped within a containment field that Lyria maintained with her own mind. She could hear it. It did not speak in words, but in impulses. It was a deep, ravenous pressure against her consciousness, scratching at the walls of her mental discipline. Feed me. The presence seemed to vibrate. I am empty. I am hollow. Quiet, Lyria thought, projecting the command with the force of a hammer strike. She winced. The effort of restraining the weapon was costing her. She could feel the edges of her own soul fraying, little pieces of her vitality being siphoned off just to keep the lattice intact. She was the Blade Maiden, the 23rd of her line, bred and trained for this single purpose, to keep the monster in the cage until the council needed it. The doors to the sanctum hissed open. Lyria did not flinch, but she reinforced her mental shields. Chancellor Vane entered. He was a small man with a large presence, dressed in the velvet and crimson robes of the High Council. He walked with a limp that he exaggerated when the cameras were rolling and hid when they were not. My dear Lyria, Vane said, his voice smooth as oil. You look tired. I am focused. Chancellor, Lyria said, not opening her eyes. Vane walked around the energy lattice, studying the weapon with a hunger that rivaled the sword's own. The ascension is approaching. The people need to see their symbol of power. They need to know the Alliance can still protect them. The sword is unstable, Lyria said, her voice tight. It has been restless. It senses something. It senses opportunity, Vane corrected. He stopped in front of her. We have found a candidate, a new wielder for the ceremony, a young captain from the outer fleets. Strong will, expendable. I mean, exemplary record. Lyria opened her eyes then. They glowed faintly in the dim room. You mean to bond it again? The last wielder lasted 3 minutes before his mind collapsed. We have made adjustments, Vane said, waving a hand dismissively. And we have the crown array now. We can channel the excess energy. Lyria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. The crown array was a defensive satellite network, supposedly designed to protect the capital from invasion. Why would the Chancellor need to channel the Soul Blade's energy into a defensive grid? Do not question the Council. Lyria, Vane said, his tone hardening. Remember who protects your people. The refugee camps on the southern continent are very flammable. It would be a shame if resources were diverted elsewhere because the Blade Maiden became difficult. It was a threat, naked and ugly. Lyria bowed her head, hiding the flash of hatred in her eyes. I serve the Alliance, she said. Good. Vane patted her shoulder, his touch making her skin crawl. Prepare the weapon. The ceremony begins at moonrise in 2 days. When he left, Lyria looked back at the sword. The black crystal seemed to pulse. It knew. It knew the Chancellor was lying. And for the first time, Lyria wondered if the monster in the cage was the weapon, or the man who held the key. Cade stared at the holographic schematic floating above the workbench. It is a death trap, Zoe said. Joe was a Veridin, a reptilian species known for their prowess with digital systems and their complete lack of optimism. He tapped a claw against the projection of the temple. Thermal sensors here, motion trackers here, and this entire corridor. Gravity crushers. If you step on the wrong tile, you become paste. Cade spun a hydro-spanner in his hand. Looking at the layout, he was in Zoe's workshop, a cluttered basement filled with cannibalized droids and half-eaten food rations. I can bypass the thermal with a cryo-suit, Cade said. And the motion trackers run on a 6-second sweep cycle. I just need to move fast. And the gravity crushers? I will try not to be heavy. Cade grinned. Zoe hissed, a sound of frustration. You are stealing a glorified glow stick, Cade. Why? Because the payout is enough to buy us a ship. Zoe, a real ship. Not that rust bucket we rented last year. We could go to the rim. We could be free. Zoe looked at Cade, his yellow eyes blinking sideways. Many who try to enter the inner sanctum never come back. The legends say the sword drives people mad before they even touch it. Good thing I am already crazy, Cade said. He pointed to a ventilation shaft on the schematic. Here. Maintenance access for the atmospheric scrubbers. It leads directly over the main chamber. It is too small, Zoe said. For a Veridin, maybe. For me, it is just cozy. Cade reached into his bag and pulled out a small spherical device. Plus, I have this. What is that? Sonic dampener, modified from a mining rig. If I time it right, I can blow the hatch and nobody will hear a thing. If you time it wrong, then I will be a very quiet corpse. The night of the Ascension ceremony, the capital of Aurelian was a sea of light, floating holographic banners draped from the skyscrapers, depicting the golden crest of the Alliance. Chanting acolytes lined the boulevards, their voices amplified by drones, creating a rhythmic, hypnotic thrum that vibrated in the chest. Inside the temple, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Lyria stood in her private preparation chamber, a circular room adjacent to the main stage. The walls were lined with white silk and energy dampeners. She was alone. The soul blade lay on a pedestal in the center of the room, sheathed in a scabbard of white metal that was etched with warning runes. She wore the ceremonial robes of the maiden, sheer, flowing layers of white that left her bioluminescent markings visible. She felt sick. The conversation with Vane had gnawed at her. She had sensed the deception in his aura. He was not looking for a hero to wield the sword. He was looking for a battery. He wanted to plug the soul blade into the crown array, and Lyria suspected the result would be catastrophic. But she was trapped. If she refused, her people in the camps would suffer. She paced the room, the silk rustling around her legs. The sword sat there, silent for now. But she could feel its weight in the room, a gravitational pull on her spirit. Above her, in the maintenance crawl space, Cade was regretting his life choices. The shaft was not cozy. It was suffocating. Dust that had not been disturbed for 3 centuries coated his throat, and his knees were raw from crawling over support struts. Almost there. Zoe's voice crackled in his earpiece. The signal was weak. You are directly above the prep chamber. Cade checked his wrist comp. The schematic showed a hatch 3 meters ahead. He crawled forward, sweat stinging his eyes. He reached the hatch and attached the sonic dampener. Ready? Cade whispered. Do not die, Zoe replied. Cade activated the device. It emitted a low-frequency hum that canceled out sound waves within a 2-meter radius. He ignited his cutting torch. The blue flame sliced through the locking mechanism like butter, silent as a ghost. Cade grinned. Too easy. He grabbed the handle to lower the hatch gently. The handle snapped. It was cheap alloy, weakened by centuries of oxidation. Cade's weight shifted. His balance failed, and the hatch gave way completely. He did not lower it gently. He rode it down like a heavy metal surfboard. Cade fell 20 feet, crashing through the ceiling of the preparation chamber. He hit the floor with a bone-jarring impact, the metal hatch clanging loudly enough to wake the dead, sonic dampener or not. He groaned, rolling onto his back. Dust billowed around him. Ow, Cade muttered. Movement flashed in his peripheral vision. Fast. Blur fast. Cade scrambled to his feet, reaching for his stunner. But he was too slow. A figure was before him, a blur of white silk and glowing skin. A hand caught his wrist, twisting it with painful precision, and suddenly he was pinned against the wall. He blinked, clearing the dust from his eyes. Lyria stood inches from him. She was taller than him, or maybe it was just the terrifying aura of power she radiated. Her silver eyes were wide with shock, but her hand was steady. In her other hand, she held the soul blade. It was still sheathed, but she held it like a club, the pommel aimed at his temple. "Who are you?" she hissed. Her voice was melodic, even in anger, but it carried an edge of steel. Cade looked at her, really looked at her. He had expected a priestess, maybe an old crone. He had not expected a creature of such terrifying alien beauty. Her skin shimmered with living light, and her eyes were pools of liquid mercury. "I am the janitor," Cade wheezed, trying to pull his arm free. "You have a serious dust problem upstairs." Lyria tightened her grip. He winced. "You are a thief," she stated. "You bypass the outer grid." "How? Charm and a winning smile?" Cade suggested. "Look, sweetheart, I am just here for the glow stick. Hand it over and nobody gets hurt." Lyria stared at him, bewildered by his audacity. He was cornered, outmatched, and intruding on the most sacred ground in the galaxy, and he was flirting with her. "You have no idea what you are asking for," she said, lowering the sheathed sword slightly but keeping him pinned. "This is not a trophy." Cade saw the opening. He shifted his weight, feinting a kick to her shin. Lyria blocked it effortlessly, but it gave him enough leverage to twist out of her grip. He spun away, putting the pedestal between them. "I am on a tight schedule," Cade said, backing toward the balcony door. The client was very specific. Lyria stepped between him and the exit. She held the sword across her body. The air in the room began to drop in temperature. The bioluminescence on her skin flared brighter, shifting from calm blue to agitated violet. "Leave," she commanded, "before I summon the guards and have you executed." Cade looked at the door. He looked at Lyria. He looked at the sword in her hand. The scabbard was white metal, intricate and beautiful. He could take her. She was strong, but he was a street fighter. He had fought Krogan mercenaries in the mud pits of Tartarus. He lunged. It was a feint. Lyria bit on it, raising her defense, and Cade dove low, tackling her around the waist. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs and silk. Cade scrambled up first. He reached for the sword, which had skittered across the floor. Lyria was on her feet instantly, her movement fluid, unnatural. She reached out, her voice cracking like a whip. "Don't touch my sword, it takes its wielder's soul," she warned. Cade paused, his hand hovering inches from the white leather grip of the hilt. He looked back at her. Her chest was heaving. her eyes wide with genuine panic. Not for herself, he realized. For him. "It takes your soul," Cade repeated. "That is a hell of a design flaw." "It will consume you," Lyria said, stepping forward, her hand outstretched. "Please, just go." Cade heard the heavy thud of boots in the corridor outside. The guards were coming. The alarm was blaring now, a high-pitched siren that drilled into his skull. He had no exit. The vents were too high. The door was blocked by approaching soldiers. He looked at the sword. He looked at Lyria. If he surrendered, he was dead. If he fought, he was dead. If he touched the sword, well, at least it would be a new way to die. He looked Lyria in the eye. Cade smiled and tightened his grip. His fingers closed around the hilt. For a microsecond, nothing happened. Then, the universe turned inside out. It was not sound. It was a roar of white noise that existed only inside his head. It felt like a hook had been driven into the base of his spine and yanked upward, dragging his entire nervous system with it. Cade screamed, but he could not hear it. He was drowning in light. He saw things that were not his, a sky of purple clouds, a child crying in a room of glass, the smell of ozone and fear. He felt a lifetime of discipline, of crushing loneliness, of standing guard over a monster. Lyria? Across the room, Lyria screamed too. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest. She felt the invasion instantly. It was raw, chaotic, and terrified. She tasted whiskey and cheap rations. She felt the phantom sensation of a stolen kiss and the deep, aching void of having no home. Cade? The soul blade erupted. The sheath disintegrated, blown away by a shockwave of pure psychic energy. The blade revealed itself, not metal, but a shard of absolute nothingness. Edged in blinding violet light, the energy wave hit the walls of the chamber. The containment shield shattered with the sound of breaking glass. The heavy blast doors blew inward, knocking the arriving guards off their feet like bowling pins. Cade could not let go. His hand was fused to the hilt by energy that crackled up his arm, burning his sleeve away. He felt power, infinite, terrifying power, surging through him, demanding direction. "Run!" The sword whispered. Or maybe it was Lyria. Or maybe it was him. Cade swung the sword. He didn't mean to. It was a spasm of agony. A crescent of violet energy slashed through the air. It carved through the stone wall of the temple as if it were wet paper. The entire balcony side of the room sheared away, crumbling into the night sky. The floor tilted. "Lyria!" Cade yelled, his voice raw. He reached out with his free hand. Lyria, blinded by the pain of the bond, scrambled toward him. Their hands clasped. The connection slammed into place like a physical bolt. The feedback loop intensified. They were not just holding hands, their nervous systems were suddenly sharing the same circuit. Cade felt her heartbeat in his chest. She felt his adrenaline in her veins. The floor gave way completely. They fell. Cade swung the sword wildly, driving it into the side of a passing hover platform that was monitoring the ceremony. The blade sank into the vehicle's engine block. The platform lurched, smoking, and dipped violently under their weight. They were dangling 1,000 feet above the glittering canyons of Aurelian. Cade hung from the sword, which was buried in the hovercar's chassis. Lyria hung from Cade's other hand, her silk robes whipping in the wind. "Do not let go!" Lyria screamed over the roar of the wind. "I am trying," Cade shouted back. He looked down at her. Her eyes were glowing so bright they looked like stars. He could feel her terror, cold and sharp, in the back of his mind. It was a bizarre, violating sensation. "Pull me up," she commanded. "I am a thief, not a weightlifter." Cade grunted. The soul blade pulsed between them. Together, it seemed to hum. Cade felt a surge of strength that was not his own. It flowed from Lyria, through their clasped hands, into his muscles. Simultaneously, Lyria felt a surge of reckless improvisation flow from him to her, quieting her panic with a heave that defied physics. Cade hauled Lyria up. She scrambled onto the smoking hover platform, then grabbed his jacket and dragged him up beside her. They collapsed on the metal deck, gasping for air. The platform was spinning out of control, careening toward the lower levels of the city. Cade looked at the sword, still glowing in his hand. He looked at Lyria, who was staring at him with a mixture of horror and awe. He could feel her pulse. He could feel her confusion. "What did you do?" Lyria whispered, her voice echoing in his head before she even spoke the words. "I think," Cade managed, staring at the weapon that was now humming like a purring cat. "I just stole your sword." The hover platform smashed through a holographic billboard of the Chancellor's face and vanished into the neon abyss of the Undercity. The headache was the first thing Lyria noticed. It was not the sharp, precise throb of a training injury or the dull ache of fatigue. It was a sprawling, chaotic noise behind her eyes, like a radio tuned to static that occasionally spiked into a scream. She opened her eyes. The world was blurry, smelling of hydraulic fluid, unwashed clothes, and ozone. She was seated on a metal bench that vibrated against her spine. She tried to raise her hands to her temples, but her wrists jerked to a halt. She looked down. Her hands were bound with industrial cable ties, the kind used for securing cargo crates. They were thick, yellow plastic, and insultingly crude. "Hey, you are awake." Lyria looked up. The human thief, Cade, was pacing the length of the small, rusted compartment. He looked terrible. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, his face was smeared with soot, and he was holding a frozen ration pack against a swelling bruise on his jaw. But she did not just see him. She felt him. It was the most violating sensation she had ever experienced. In the temple, her connection to the soul blade had been a one-way street. She poured her discipline in, and the weapon pushed its hunger back. This was different. This was a flood. She could feel a frantic bird-like fluttering in her chest that was not her own heart. She tasted the sour tang of adrenaline on her tongue, though she was sitting still. And beneath it all, she felt a current of stray, chaotic thoughts, panic about Alliance pursuers, a regret about leaving a favorite pair of boots behind, and a weirdly specific craving for spiced noodles. "Get out of my head," Lyria said. Her voice was a croak. Cade stopped pacing. He looked at her, his eyes wide. "I am trying. Believe me, I am trying. You are loud. Do you always think in complete sentences? It is exhausting." Lyria tested the cable ties. They held firm. "Release me." Cade hesitated. He gestured with the frozen ration pack. "Look, I do not want to keep you tied up. But back there, you tried to stab me. Then you tried to arrest me. Then we fell off a building. I figure I keep the cuffs on until we establish a baseline of nonviolence. You kidnapped me." "I rescued us," Cade corrected, though she felt a spike of guilt flash through the bond. It tasted like bitter lemon. That hover platform was going down. "I steered us into the lower docks. I paid off a guy I know to let us hide in this. Well, it is technically a shuttle, though I think it is mostly held together by hope and duct tape." Lyria looked around. The space was cramped, barely large enough for the two of them in a pile of smuggling crates. In the corner, resting on a greasy tarp, lay the soul blade. It was quiet now. The blinding violet light had dimmed to a sullen, pulsing hum. It looked innocuous, like a shard of obsidian glass, but Lyria could feel it watching them. "I need to secure the weapon," Lyria said, her training overriding her confusion. It is dangerous. Tell me about it, Cade muttered. He walked over to the sword. I tried to pick it up while you were out. I wanted to put it in a locker. He reached down. His hand hovered over the hilt. Don't, Lyria said instinctively. Cade ignored her. He grabbed the hilt. Immediately, he hissed and snatched his hand back. He shook it violently, blowing on his palm. Lyria felt the sensation as if it were her own hand. A searing, cold burn like touching dry ice. It does not like me anymore, Cade said, grimacing. Let me try, Lyria said. Cade looked at her, then at the knife on his belt. He sighed, walked over and sliced the cable ties on her wrists. Do not make me regret this, Your Highness. Lyria rubbed her wrists, staring at him coolly. I am not a princess. I am a guardian. She stood up. Her legs felt heavy, another side effect of the bond. She walked to the tarp and reached for the sword. She expected the familiar cold resistance, the heavy weight she had carried for 10 years. Instead, as her fingers brushed the hilt, the world dissolved. She was not in the shuttle. She was standing in a ruin under a red sky. Ash was falling like snow. She was 5 years old, small and scrawny, hiding under a collapsed ferrocrete slab. She was terrified. A soldier in black armor was walking past, his boots crunching on the skull of a doll she had dropped. She felt a crushing, absolute loneliness, a belief that no one was coming for her, that she was trash to be discarded. Lyria gasped and jerked her hand back. The vision snapped off. She was back in the shuttle, breathing hard. Cade was staring at her, his face pale. What was that? He whispered. Lyria looked at him, really seeing him for the first time. The cocky thief was a veneer. Beneath it was that boy in the ruins. I saw your memory, she said softly. Cade's jaw tightened. He stepped back, defensive walls slamming up in his mind. She felt them like iron shutters closing. Great, he said, his voice brittle. Pay-per-view trauma. Just what I needed. Lyria looked at her hand. The sword had shown her his pain. It was knitting them together. We are bonded, she said, the realization settling in her stomach like a stone. Both of us. It has never happened before. The texts say the soul blade chooses one wielder. Well, it chose two, Cade said. He sat heavily on a crate. So, how do we divorce a sword? We cannot, Lyria said. She felt a sudden, sharp pinch in her side. She flinched, hand going to her ribs. Ow! Cade jumped, rubbing his own ribs on the exact same spot. Hey, why did you poke me? I did not poke you, Lyria said. I felt a pain in my ribs. I have a bruise there from the landing, Cade said. He lifted his shirt, revealing a dark purple welt on his side. Lyria stared at it. She pulled up the silk of her ceremonial robe. Her skin was unblemished, the bioluminescent markings glowing softly. But when Cade pressed his finger into his bruise, Lyria gasped, feeling the pressure on her own skin. It is not just memories, she whispered. It is physical. Cade looked horrified. You mean, if I stub my toe, I feel it, Lyria finished, and if I die? Cade went very still. The implications hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. If I die, you die, he said. Lyria nodded slowly. And if the council catches us, they will kill you to get to the sword, son, which means they will kill me too. Cade stood up, his panic rising again. She felt it as a frantic heat. Okay, change of plan, he said. We need help. We need someone who understands tech that should not exist. Who? Cade grabbed his jacket. A friend. The only person on this planet who hates the Alliance almost as much as I do right now. The black market tech bazaar was a labyrinth of steam and neon. built into the hollowed-out carcass of a crashed colony ship in the lower sectors. Rain hammered against the metal hull overhead, creating a deafening rhythmic drumbeat. Cade moved through the crowd with practiced ease, ducking under low-hanging wires and sidestepping vendors selling recycled cybernetics. He wore the hood of his jacket up, carrying the soul blade wrapped in the greasy tarp like a precious, deadly infant. Lyria followed close behind him. She had torn the hem of her white robes to make them less conspicuous and smeared grease on her glowing markings, but she still drew stares. She moved with a predator's grace that did not belong in the stumbling, desperate crowd of the Undercity. They turned down a narrow alleyway lined with server racks and pushed through a heavy blast door. Zoe was there, bent over a workbench, soldering a neural interface. The Veridon looked up, his yellow eyes widening as he saw Cade. "You are dead," Zoe said flatly. "I saw the news. The temple exploded. They are saying a terrorist cell bombed the Ascension." "I am not dead," Cade said, placing the wrapped sword on the bench. "But I am having a very bad day. Zoe." Zoe looked at Lyria. "And you brought a hostage?" "She is not a hostage," Cade said. "She is my partner." Lyria bristled at the word co-victim. She corrected. Zoe looked between them, sensing the tension. He approached the bundle on the table. "What, is that it?" Cade nodded. Zoe unwrapped the tarp. The soul blade lay there, dark and quiet. Zoe picked up a scanner and ran it over the weapon. The device shrieked and sparked, its display scrambling into nonsense. Zoe hissed, shaking the scanner. "The energy output is impossible. It is reading as a singularity. And... wait." He adjusted the frequency. He looked at Cade, then at Lyria. "The biometric lock is confused." Zoe murmured. "It is reading two signatures, but they are overlaid. It thinks you are the same person." "Cosmic level weird, right?" Cade said, leaning against the wall. Zoe tapped his claws on the bench, agitated. "Cade, listen to me. This is not just a heist gone wrong. I did some digging into the credit trail for your client. And it is a shell company, deep encryption. But I found a routing number that connects to a slush fund for the Chancellor's private security directorate." Cade closed his eyes. He let out a long, slow breath. Lyria felt his resignation. It was a heavy, sinking feeling, like drowning. "I was set up," Cade said. "You were the scapegoat." Zoe confirmed. They wanted the sword stolen so they could blame it on the criminal element. It gives them an excuse to crack down on the outer sectors. "You were supposed to die in the temple, Cade. The automated defenses were rigged to let you in, but not to let you out." Lyria felt a surge of cold fury. It was not her own. It was Cade's, but it mixed with her own realization. Vane had not just tested the weapon, he had orchestrated a false flag operation. "He used us," Lyria said, her voice icy. "He used the Ascension as a stage play." Cade looked at her. His usual humor was gone. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I dragged you into this." "You did," Lyria said. "But we are in it now." A siren wailed outside, close and piercing. Zoe's ears flattened against his skull. "Patrols," Zoe hissed. "They must have tracked the energy signature of the sword. You have to go." "Where?" Cade asked. Zoe shoved a data chip into Cade's hand. "The back exit leads to the ventilation grid. Go to the upper causeway. I will scramble their sensors. Go." Cade grabbed the sword. Lyria was already moving. They burst out of the back door just as the front entrance was blown off its hinges. The chase through the bazaar was a blur of motion and noise. Alliance enforcement drones buzzed overhead, their spotlights cutting through the steam. Armored troopers shoved through the crowds, shouting orders. Cade and Lyria ran. Cade's style was pure chaos. He vaulted over a fruit stand, scattering glowing melons across the path of the pursuing troopers. He grabbed a hanging electrical wire and swung around a corner, narrowly avoiding a stun bolt. Lyria was different. She did not run. She flowed. When a drone swooped down to block their path, she did not slow down. She leaped, kicking off a wall, and drove her heel into the drone's optical sensor with surgical precision. It spiraled into a stall of antique data tapes. "Cade, left!" Lyria shouted. She did not know how she knew, but she felt the ambush before it happened. Through the bond, she sensed the intent of the soldiers waiting around the next bend. Cade didn't question her. He skidded, changed direction, and dove through a tear in a plastic awning. 2 stun bolts sizzled through the space where his head had been a second before. "Thanks," he yelled. "Duck!" Lyria projected the thought. Cade dropped instantly. A heavy crate, knocked loose by a stray shot, swung over his head on a crane chain. They reached the security checkpoint that separated the lower bazaar from the transit lifts. It was blocked. A shimmering force field barred the way, and a bored-looking guard was checking IDs. "We cannot stop," Cade panted. "They are 10 seconds behind us." Lyria looked at the checkpoint. There was a privacy booth for biometric scanning. It was small, designed for one person. "In there," she said. They shoved into the booth just as the troopers turned the corner. The glass door slid shut, misting over to provide privacy. The booth was tiny. Cade was pressed against the back wall and Lyria was pressed against him. There was zero space. Their chests were touching. His legs were tangled with hers. The scanner voice droned, "Please state your purpose of travel." Cade's heart was hammering against Lyria's ribs. Or was it her heart against his? The distinction was blurring. "Hiding," Cade whispered. The guard outside tapped on the glass. "Open up! Routine inspection!" Cade looked at Lyria. His eyes were wide, panicked. Lyria felt his fear, but also something else. As their bodies pressed together, the soul blade tucked awkwardly between them in the tarp began to warm up. It was reacting to the proximity, to the adrenaline, to the sudden, undeniable intimacy of the moment. "Act natural," Cade hissed. He grabbed her face. It was not a romantic gesture, and it was a desperation move. He pulled her head down, burying his face in her neck to hide his features from the glass. Lyria froze. Her entire life, her body had been a vessel for the sacred, untouchable. No one touched the Blade Maiden. But Cade was touching her. His hands were rough, calloused, clutching her shoulders. His breath was hot on her skin, and the bond screamed on it was not pain. It was a sudden, overwhelming rush of heat. Lyria felt Cade's nervous energy. But beneath it, she felt a sharp, jagged spike of attraction that he was trying desperately to suppress. He smelled like rain and old engine oil. And suddenly, that was the most grounding thing in the universe. The guard peered through the misted glass. He saw 2 figures entwined, steam rising, heavy breathing. "Move along," the guard shouted, banging on the glass again. "Get a room, you degenerates!" The force field deactivated. Cade waited a beat, then pulled back. His face was flushed red. He looked like he wanted to phase through the floor. "Sorry," he mumbled, refusing to meet her eyes. It was the only way to hide your face markings." Lyria felt a wash of shame, not hers, his. He was mortified that he had touched her, terrified he had offended her high and mighty sensibilities. He expected her to strike him, but beneath that, she felt her own shame rising. She had enjoyed it. For a split second, she had not been the Blade Maiden. She had just been a woman in a scanner booth with a man who was warm and alive. "It worked," Lyria said, her voice unsteadily. Let us go. They hurried out of the booth, heads down, merging into the crowd heading for the transit lifts. The soul blade, still wrapped in the tarp, was radiating a smug, contented warmth against Lyria's hip. They found refuge on a rooftop in the industrial district. It was high above the smog, where the air was thin and cold. The neon lights of the city below turned the rain into falling jewels of pink and blue. Cade collapsed against a ventilation unit, sliding down until he hit the gravel roof. He threw his head back, letting the rain wash the sweat and grime from his face. Lyria stood by the edge, looking out at the sprawling, infinite city. The wind whipped her torn robes around her legs. "That was close," Cade said. "Too close." Lyria did not answer immediately. She was still reeling from the booth. The bond was settling down, but it left a humming sensitivity in her nerves. She could feel Cade watching her. She could feel his exhaustion, his relief, and a deep, gnawing loneliness that he kept hidden behind his jokes. He felt like a man who had spent his whole life running, waiting for the inevitable moment when he would trip. "Why do you do it?" Lyria asked, turning to face him. "Do what? Steal ancient weapons? Ruin perfectly good religious ceremonies?" "Hide," she said. "You use humor like a shield. You pretend nothing matters, but I can feel you, Cade. You are lonely." Cade's smile faltered. He looked away, picking at a loose thread on his jacket. "Occupational hazard," he said. "You do not make many friends in my line of work. People are temporary. The payout is the only thing that stays." Lyria walked over and sat down next to him, leaving a respectable distance between them. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "Payouts?" Cade shrugged. "I want a ship, a real one, fast engines, no tracking beacon. I want to go to the edge of the charts and just exist without looking over my shoulder." "And?" Lyria pressed. Cade looked at her. The neon light reflected in his dark eyes. "And maybe someone who does not run away after breakfast. Someone to watch my back." He laughed, a self-deprecating sound. "Listen to me. Getting sentimental. Next thing you know, I will be writing poetry." Lyria did not laugh. "I understand," she said softly. "I have been surrounded by people my entire life, acolytes, counselors, guards. But I have never been with anyone. I am a symbol. Symbols do not have friends." Cade looked at the bioluminescent markings on her arm. They were beautiful, intricate patterns that pulsed with her heartbeat. "You are not a symbol. Lyria," he said. "You are the most terrifyingly competent person I have ever met, and you have a right hook that could take out a Krogan." Lyria smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, but it transformed her face. The soul blade lay between them on the gravel. The tarp had loosened. "We need to cover it," Lyria said. "The energy signature might leak." She reached for the tarp. Cade reached for it at the same time. Their fingers brushed against the exposed hilt. It happened again. But this time, it was not a memory. It was a vision of the present, or perhaps a potential future. The world dropped away. They were suspended in a void of golden light. Lyria saw herself, but she was not wearing the robes. She was wearing Cade's leather jacket. She was laughing. Cade was there, his hands on her waist, pulling her close. There was no fear, no counsel, no duty. Cade saw it too. He felt the softness of her skin, the strength in her back. He felt a fierce, burning desire that went beyond the physical. A desire to protect her, to know her, to be the one thing in the universe she could rely on. In the vision, they kissed. It was slow, deep, and devastating. It felt like two halves of a broken star snapping back together. "Yes," the soul blade whispered. "This." They jerked apart as if they had been electrocuted. Cade scrambled backward, hitting his head against the vent unit. Lyria pulled her hand to her chest, breathing as if she had just sprinted a mile. Her face was flushed a deep violet. Cade was staring at her, his mouth open, looking completely wrecked. What? What was that? Cade stammered. Lyria shook her head. She was trembling. The intimacy of the vision had been absolute. She had felt his desire for her, raw and unfiltered, and worse, she had felt her own response. She had wanted it. She had wanted to surrender to that golden void. "It is the bond," she said, her voice shaking. "It is confusing our minds. It is projecting." Possibilities. Possibilities, Cade repeated. Right. Just glitches. He looked terrified. Not of the Alliance, but of her. Of them. "We need to understand this," Lyria said, forcing steel into her voice. "We cannot operate if the weapon is going to do that." "We need the records," Cade said, latching onto the mission as a lifeline. "The original texts. You said they were on Varun?" "Yes, the archives." "Then we go to Varun," Cade said. He stood up, avoiding looking at the sword. "We get a ship. We get off this rock. We figure out how to break this bond." Lyria stood up too. "Is that what you want? To break it?" Cade looked at her. He hesitated. For a second she thought he would say no. "I want to survive, Lyria," he said quietly. "And I do not think you can survive being tied to a screw-up like me." He turned and began to pack up the gear. Lyria watched him, feeling the ache of his self-loathing through the link. She wanted to reach out and touch his shoulder, to tell him he was wrong. But she didn't. She was the Blade Maiden. She had a duty. "We need a ship," she said. The cargo ship was called the Rusty Minnock, a name that inspired zero confidence. It sat on a landing pad in the unauthorized zone, steam venting from its flank. Cade negotiated with the captain, a Tellarite with a cybernetic eye and a bad attitude. "I do not carry passengers." The captain grunted, "Especially not with the lockdown." "We are not passengers," Cade said. "We are cargo, and we are paying in data." He held up the drive he had stolen in the Undercity, the one with the magistrate's offshore accounts. It was worth a fortune. "This gets us to Varun," Cade said, no questions asked. The captain snatched the drive. He slotted it into his datapad, checked the contents, and whistled. "You have a deal. Cargo hold 3. Do not touch anything. If you eat my rations, I throw you out the airlock." Lyria stepped forward. "We also need access to the secure hyperspace lanes. The Alliance has blockaded the main routes." The captain narrowed his real eye. "I do not have those codes." "I do," Lyria said. She tapped her temple. "Council priority clearance. I can navigate us through the blockade without triggering a single sensor." The captain looked at her, then at Cade. "Who are you two?" "Nobody," Cade said. "Just 2 people trying to get to the library." They boarded the ship as the heavy engines began to spool up. From the shadows of a nearby gantry tower, a figure lowered a pair of macro binoculars. The agent tapped a communication link on his collar. "Target acquired," the agent whispered. "They are boarding a freighter, designation Rusty Minnock, heading for Varun." A voice crackled in his ear. The Chancellor's voice. "Let them go," Vane said. "They are looking for answers. Let them find them. It will make their despair all the sweeter when we catch them, track them, and prepare the interception team." The agent watched as the freighter lifted off, its engines turning the rain into steam. "Understood, Chancellor." Inside the cargo hold, Lyria and Cade sat on a crate of recycled protein paste. The ship shuddered as it broke the atmosphere. The soul blade sat between them, silent for now. Cade looked at Lyria. "You okay?" Lyria looked at her hands. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his skin from the vision. "I do not know," she said honestly. Cade smiled. It was a small, tired, genuine smile. "Me neither." The ship punched through the cloud layer, leaving the neon lights of Aurelian behind, heading into the dark. Cold silence of the void. The transition from hyperspace was not a sudden stop, but a feeling of being unraveled and then knitted back together in the wrong order. The rusty Minox shuddered, its hull groaning under the gravitational shearing before spitting itself out into real space. On the bridge, Cade gripped the console, swallowing the bile that always accompanied a rough jump. Through the viewport, the view was enough to silence even his habitual sarcasm. Varun hung in the void like a jewel wrapped in gauze. It was a planet of deep, bruised purples and oceans the color of ink, surrounded by a veil of permanent, shifting auroras that ribboned through the upper atmosphere in shades of emerald and violet. Orbiting the world was a graveyard of knowledge, thousands of derelict satellite libraries, ancient data spires that had gone dark centuries ago, drifting in silent, majestic formation. "Welcome to the Galactic Library," Cade muttered, rubbing his eyes. "I forgot my card. Do you think they will charge late fees?" Lyria did not smile. She stood by the viewport, her hand resting on the durasteel frame, her silver eyes reflecting the ghostly light of the auroras. To her, this place was not a joke. It was a memory of cold stone floors and the smell of old parchment, of instructors who taught her that knowledge was dangerous and obedience was safety. "I came here when I was 6, she said softly. "The council brings all potential maidens here, to show us what happens when knowledge is unchecked. They call it the world of whispers." Cade looked at her, sensing the melancholy that radiated from her through their bond. It felt like cold rain on a summer day. "Cheery," he said. "Let us hope the librarians are friendlier than your council." He turned to the pilot's chair, where Zoe was frantically typing on a terminal that looked like it had been salvaged from a toaster. The Veridin had been stowed away in the maintenance crawlspace, revealing himself only after they had cleared the Aurelian system. "Any hits on the landing vectors?" Cade asked. Zoe hissed, his yellow eyes darting across the screen. "The automated beacons are active. I am ghosting our signature behind a weather satellite. If we are lucky, we will look like just another piece of space debris." As the ship began its descent, the soul blade, strapped to Cade's back in a jury-rigged harness, gave a sudden, violent throb. Cade winced, stumbling forward. It was not pain, exactly, it was a surge of demand. He reached back, his fingers brushing the hilt to steady it. The moment his skin made contact, the bridge of the ship vanished. He was no longer standing on metal plating. He was kneeling on a cold, polished floor. The air smelled of incense and terror. He looked down and saw his hands, but they were small, delicate, shaking uncontrollably. He was Lyria. He was a child. A looming figure in crimson robes stood over him, holding a needle that glowed with suppression serum. "Be still, child," the figure intoned. "The pain is the proof of your worth." The needle descended. The fear was absolute, a white-hot spike of abandonment. She wanted her mother, but she had been taken away. She wanted to scream, but she knew that screaming would only make the training last longer. Cade gasped, pulling his hand away from the sword as if he had touched a live wire. Across the room, Lyria stumbled, gripping the edge of the viewport. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide and haunted. She had not been on the bridge either. She had been in a muddy trench on a moon whose name she did not know. The air tasted of copper and burning fuel. She looked down at her hands, Cade's hands, and saw them covered in blood that was not hers. In front of her, a village burned. Civilians were screaming, and a commanding officer was shouting orders to leave no witnesses. She felt the crushing weight of the rifle in her hands. She felt the bile rising. She felt the desperate, paralyzed desire to stop it, to shoot the officer, to do something. But she did nothing. She froze. The shame of that inaction was heavier than the weapon. It was a rod in the center of her chest, a conviction that she was a coward, that she deserved to be garbage. The vision snapped. They were back on the ship. The only sound was the hum of the atmospheric thrusters. Cade stared at Lyria, his face pale. He looked stripped raw. The cocky thief, the man who laughed at danger, was gone. In his place was a soldier who hated himself. "You saw it," Cade whispered. Lyria nodded slowly. She could still feel the mud on her boots, the shame burning in her gut, and she knew he could still feel the needle, the cold terror of being a child sacrifice. "I did not know," she said, her voice trembling. "I was 19, Cade said, his voice rough, just a kid who thought the Alliance were the good guys. I learned better." He looked at the sword on his back with a mixture of fear and loathing. It is getting stronger. The bond. It is not just sharing location anymore. It is digging. It is looking for leverage, Lyria said, stepping toward him. She reached out, almost touching his arm, then stopped. It feeds on emotion, shame, fear. It connects us through our wounds. Cade looked at her, and for a moment, the bond hummed with a different frequency, not shame, understanding. He saw that she was not just a pampering princess of the council. She was a survivor of institutionalized torture. She saw that he was not just a greedy criminal. He was a man trying to outrun his own conscience. "We should land," Cade said, breaking the gaze. "Before we start sharing shower thoughts." They touched down in a courtyard overgrown with violet moss and lined with towering statues of forgotten scholars. The air on Varun was thin and cold, carrying the scent of ozone from the auroras overhead. Zoe remained on the ship to monitor communications, but before they left, he pulled up a holographic display that filled the cargo hold. "I decoded the data fragment you stole," Zoe said, his crest quivering with agitation. "It is worse than we thought." "How much worse?" Cade asked, checking the charge on his pistol. "Galactic lobotomy worse," Zoe said. He tapped a key. "The soul blade is not unique. There are 7 of them." Lyria froze. "That is impossible. The blade is one." "The blade is a terminal," Zoe corrected. "Look." The hologram shifted to show a network diagram, 7 points of light connected to a central hub. "The Chancellor has been excavating ancient sites for decades," Zoe explained. "He has found 6 other cores. He calls them the harmonics. But they are empty. They need a power source to function." "Souls," Lyria whispered. "Exactly." Zoe pointed to the central hub, the crown array. It is not a defense grid. It is a broadcast amplifier. "The Chancellor intends to use the soul blades to harvest the consciousness of the attendees at the summit, the most powerful leaders in the galaxy, and feed that energy into the array." "To do what?" Cade asked. "To broadcast a command signal directly into the neural cortex of every sentient being in the Alliance." Zoe said, "Harmonization, total obedience. No more rebellion, no more crime, no more free will. He is going to turn the galaxy into a hive mind," Cade said, a cold horror settling in his stomach. "With himself as the queen bee, we have to stop him," Lyria said. Her voice was steel. "We do," Zoe agreed. "But first, you need to figure out how to use that thing on your back without it turning your brains into soup." I found a reference in the archives. Sector 4, the Hall of Echoes. The Hall of Echoes was a cavernous structure of translucent crystal, suspended over a chasm that dropped into the planet's core. Floating slabs of data glass drifted through the air like lazy fish, displaying fractured text and moving images from millennia ago. Lyria led the way, her hand hovering near the soul blade on Cade's back but not touching it. The silence of the archive was heavy, broken only by the hum of the anti-grav generators. "Here," Lyria said, pointing to a massive slab that drifted near the ceiling. Cade fired his grapple line, snagging the slab and pulling it down to eye level. Dust motes danced in the light of the display. The record was corrupted, flickering with static, but the image was clear. It showed two figures, one tall, one short, standing back to back. Between them, they held a single weapon that looked identical to the soul blade. But the light of the blade was not the hungry violet they knew. It was gold. The dual wielders, Lyria read from the ancient script, bound not by ritual but by the resonance of souls. Where the singular wielder is consumed, the dual are sustained. She scrolled the text. Her eyes widened. "The blade craves the void," she translated. "It eats the wielder to fill its emptiness. But if two souls are joined, if they offer themselves to each other, they fill the void before the sword can." Cade finished, reading over her shoulder. Lyria nodded. "It says they redirected the soul tithe. Instead of feeding the weapon their life force, they fed it their connection, their trust, their—" She stopped. The word in the ancient text was specific. It meant surrender, but it also meant intimacy. It implied a shedding of barriers so complete that it was considered a sacred taboo in her culture. "Their desire," Cade said. He looked at the image of the two figures. "They look like they are about to. Well," he cleared his throat, looking away. "So, basically, we have academic approval to make out to save the galaxy." Lyria felt a flush rise up her neck. It was not just embarrassment. It was a spike of heated curiosity that the bond immediately betrayed to Cade. She felt his reaction, a startled, nervous flare of attraction that he tried to squash down with humor. "It is not a joke, Cade," she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "It requires absolute vulnerability, no secrets, no walls." Cade laughed, but it sounded brittle. "I am a thief. Lyria, I am built of walls. You do not want to see what is behind them. You saw the memory, and it is not pretty." "I saw a man who was hurt," Lyria said softly. "Not a monster." She stepped closer to him. The crystal slab drifted away, forgotten. The air between them seemed to charge with static. "You are terrified of being known," she said. "And I am terrified of being owned. But the sword, it forces us to be both." Cade looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "You are the Blade Maiden. You are supposed to be pure. This is against everything you were taught." "I am learning new things," Lyria whispered. She reached out. Her fingers grazed his hand. The soul blade hummed, a low, expectant sound. It was not the angry buzz of hunger. It was a question. Before they could answer it, the wall of the archive exploded. Cade was thrown backward by the concussive force, slamming into a pillar of obsidian. Lyria spun, her training taking over before she even registered the threat. Through the smoke and raining debris, a squad of armored figures descended on grav sleds. They wore the sleek silver armor of the Alliance Elite Guard. Leading them was a figure Lyria knew better than her own reflection. Vorian. He landed in the center of the hall, his cape billowing. He was a striking specimen of her species, tall, broad-shouldered, with bioluminescent markings that glowed with the red hue of righteous fury. He held a plasma lance in one hand. "Lyria!" Vorian shouted, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Step away from the human!" "Vorian, no!" Lyria yelled, holding up a hand. "It is not what you think. He has corrupted you." Vorian snarled. He walked forward, his eyes fixed on Cade, who was struggling to his feet, blood trickling from his hairline. "I am here to save you, my love," Vorian said to Lyria, though his eyes never left Cade. "I will scrub this stain from your soul. Hey, tall, dark, and glowing." Cade groaned, wiping the blood from his eye. "We are actually having a very productive library study group. You are interrupting?" "Silence, defiler." Vorian raised his lance. Cade reached back and drew the soul blade. The reaction was instantaneous. As the violet blade hissed into existence, the archive reacted. The floating data slabs began to spin wildly. The air filled with spectral shapes, ghostly echoes of the thousands of wielders who had died feeding the sword. They swirled around the room like a blizzard of souls. Screaming silently, the Alliance soldiers hesitated, their sensors blinded by the psychic chaff. "Now!" Lyria shouted. She did not run away from Cade. She ran to him. They moved. It was not the clumsy coordination of the scanner booth. This was the bond in full effect. Cade ducked before Lyria even threw the punch, allowing her energy-wreathed fist to connect with the helmet of a soldier who had been aiming at his back. As the soldier crumpled, Lyria pirouetted, using Cade's shoulder as a fulcrum to launch herself into the air, kicking a grav sled into a spin. Cade swung the soul blade. He didn't aim with his eyes, he aimed with Lyria's spatial awareness. She saw the flanker coming from the left, and Cade felt the warning. He spun, the violet blade carving through the soldier's rifle and armor in a single fluid arc. The spectral echoes danced with them. When Cade struck, the ghosts swarmed the target, distracting them with psychic feedback. When Lyria moved, the ghosts formed a shield, deflecting blaster fire. It was a dance of violence, beautiful and terrifying. Vorian roared, charging through the chaos. He was a master duelist, his plasma lance humming with lethal power. He ignored Cade, focusing on disarming him. Vorian thrust the lance. Cade parried, the soul blade screeching as it met the plasma energy. The force of the blow drove Cade to his knees. "Surrender the weapon!" Vorian shouted, pressing the attack. "The Chancellor waits. The Crown Array is primed. The summit begins in 2 days. And when the harmonization strikes, you will be nothing but a drone in the hive." "He is monologuing," Cade grunted, straining against the weight of the lance. "Why do they always monologue?" "He believes he is the hero," Lyria said, landing beside them. She struck Vorian with a palm strike to the chest, channeling her own bioenergy. It would have stopped a normal heart. Vorian merely staggered, his personal shield absorbing the blow. He backhanded her. Lyria flew across the room, crashing into a crystal display. She slumped to the floor, dazed. "Lyria!" Cade screamed. The distraction cost him. Vorian spun the lance, knocking the soul blade from Cade's grip. The sword skittered across the floor, landing near Lyria. Vorian leveled the lance at Cade's chest. "You are an infestation," Vorian said coldly. He fired. It happened in slow motion. Lyria saw the lance tip glow. She felt the buildup of energy. She knew she was too far away to stop it. But Cade didn't try to dodge. He didn't try to run. He looked at Lyria, his eyes filled with a desperate apology. He threw himself forward, not away from the blast, but into its path, angling his body to shield her even though she was yards away. It was an instinct, irrational, stupid, and absolute. The plasma bolt hit him in the shoulder. It was not a clean shot. It tore through his jacket, cauterizing flesh and shattering bone. Cade was thrown backward, landing in a heap near Lyria's feet. "Cade!" Lyria scrambled to him, and he was not moving. The smell of burnt ozone and roasted meat was sickening. His chest was a ruin. Vorian stepped forward, lowering his lance. "It is done. Come, Lyria. The Chancellor will forgive you. We will cleanse your mind." Lyria looked up. Her eyes were not silver anymore. They were white-hot. She did not look at Vorian. She looked at the soul blade. She grabbed the hilt. This time, she did not fight the hunger. She did not use her discipline to wall it off. She opened the gates. "Take it," she screamed internally. "Take everything." She slammed her other hand onto Cade's chest. The soul blade shrieked. It was a sound that shattered every crystal slab in the hall. A pillar of blinding light erupted from Lyria, engulfing them both. Lyria felt her soul being ripped from her body. It was not a trickle. It was a torrent. She poured her memories, her vitality, her very life force into the blade, and through the blade, into Cade. She felt herself burning. Her childhood, her training, her name, it all turned to fuel. She saw Cade's wound knitting together, bone fusing, flesh reweaving, powered by the raw energy of her sacrifice. "Stop!" Vorian yelled, shielding his eyes from the glare. "You will kill yourself." Good, Lyria thought. Better to die free than live as your puppet. She pushed harder. The edges of her vision turned black. She felt cold. So cold. And then she felt a hand. It was Cade's hand. He had grabbed her wrist. Enough. His voice echoed in her mind. "Lyria, stop. You are fading." He was pulling back. He was rejecting the energy, pushing it back into her. "I won't let you go," she thought. "We go together," he answered. The light exploded outward, a shockwave of pure force. It hit Vorian and his squad like a physical wall, blasting them out of the archive, tumbling them into the chasm below. The roof of the hall collapsed, burying the entrance in tons of rock. Silence returned to the Hall of Echoes. Cade woke up to the sound of coughing. He was alive. He shouldn't be. He remembered the heat of the plasma, the darkness. He sat up, clutching his chest. His jacket was a burnt rag, but the skin beneath was pink and new, scarred but whole. Lyria. She was lying a few feet away, curled on her side. Her skin was gray. The bioluminescent markings were dim, flickering faintly like a dying bulb. Cade crawled to her, ignoring the stiffness in his new shoulder. He pulled her into his lap. "Lyria? Hey, glowworm, wake up." She stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her silver eyes were dull. "Did we win?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. "Yeah, we won." Cade brushed the hair from her face. His hands were shaking. "You crazy. You absolutely crazy woman, you burned yourself out. You used the sword to heal me. You were dying," she said simply. "So you decided to swap places?" Cade's voice cracked. He was angry. He was furious. And he was so terrified he could barely breathe. "That is not the deal. Lyria, I am the disposable one. I am the thief. You are the important one." "To who?" Lyria asked. She struggled to sit up, leaning heavily against him. "To the council. To the Chancellor. To me!" Cade shouted. The words echoed in the ruins. He stopped, realizing what he had said. The silence stretched, heavy and vibrating. "I cannot do this if you are going to die for me," Cade said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have watched everyone I ever cared about die. Lyria, I cannot watch you." Lyria looked at him. Color was slowly returning to her cheeks, the bond trickling energy back into her system, his energy now cycling back to her. "For the first time in my life," Lyria said, I made a choice. It was not for duty. It was not for the alliance. It was because I wanted you to live. She reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his face. I chose what I wanted, she said. Cade looked at her lips. He looked at the ruin of the temple around them, the dust settling in the shafts of light. He stopped joking, he stopped running, he leaned in. It was not tentative, it was a collision. He kissed her with the desperation of a man who had died and come back to life, and she kissed him with the fierce possessiveness of a woman who had just paid for his soul with her own. The soul blade, lying on the floor beside them, began to hum. It was not the violet screech of hunger. It was a low, golden resonance. It was warm. It sounded like a cello string plucked in a quiet room. As they kissed, the bond between them flared, but it didn't hurt. It didn't invade. It flowed. Cade felt her love for him terrifying and vast. Lyria felt his devotion, rock solid and absolute. They pulled apart, breathless, foreheads resting against each other. The sword's light bathed them in a soft amber glow. It stopped whispering, Cade said, looking down at the blade. It is full, Lyria realized. She picked up the sword. It felt light, balanced. It is not eating us anymore. Because we gave it what it wanted, Cade said. We stopped fighting the connection. He looked at her, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. So, does this mean we are going steady? Because usually, I buy a girl dinner before we merge souls. Lyria laughed. It was a weak, tired sound, but it was real. I think we skipped dinner and went straight to marriage, she said. Cade grinned, though his eyes were wet. I can work with that. His comlink beeped, shattering the moment. It was Zoe. Cade! Lyria, are you there? I am picking up massive energy spikes. And... oh, spirits. What is it? Zoe? Cade asked, helping Lyria to her feet. I found the coordinates Vorian mentioned, Zoe said. The secret facility. It is not just under the summit platform. It is the platform. The entire station is the crown array. And Cade? Yeah? The countdown has started. The Chancellor has moved up the schedule. The summit begins in 12 hours. Cade looked at Lyria. She stood straighter, the golden light of the sword reflecting in her eyes. She did not look like a victim anymore. She looked like a queen. We have a summit to crash, Lyria said. Cade tightened his grip on her hand. After you, partner. The shuttle was a sleek, silver dart, painted with the diplomatic crest of a mid-rim trade delegation. It was a lie, of course, just like everything else about their return to Aurelian. Inside the passenger cabin, Lyria stood before a hollow mirror, adjusting the neckline of a gown that cost more than Cade had earned in his entire life. The fabric was a shifting, pearlescent material that mimicked the flow of water, clinging to her form and cascading to the floor in waves of luminescent silk. She looked like the Blade Maiden. She looked like the icon the galaxy believed her to be, untouchable, serene, and cold. Behind her, Cade was wrestling with a cummerbund. This is a torture device, Cade muttered, tugging at the stiff fabric around his waist. I am convinced this was invented by the Inquisition. How am I supposed to breathe? Beauty requires sacrifice, Lyria said, her voice calm, though her eyes in the mirror were tight with anxiety. Cade abandoned the cummerbund and picked up a high-collared jacket of midnight blue velvet. He slid his arms into it, wincing as the cut restricted his movement. I look like a penguin who joined a cult, he assessed, looking at his reflection. Lyria turned. The motion was fluid, a practiced grace that she had slipped back into as easily as the gown. She walked over to him, her hands reaching out to straighten his lapels. She smoothed the fabric over his chest, her fingers lingering over the spot where the plasma burn had healed, leaving a web of silvery scar tissue beneath his shirt. "You look distinguished," she corrected, "like a consort to a high priestess." Cade snorted. "Consort? Is that the polite word for target practice?" He looked down at her. The soul blade was strapped to her thigh beneath the volume of her skirt, its presence a hum in the back of their minds. The bond between them was currently a low, steady static of shared nerves. He felt her fear, cold and sharp, hidden beneath the layer of icy discipline she had constructed. "Lyria," he said softly, "we do not have to do this. We could turn the ship around, go to the outer rim." Lyria shook her head. Her bioluminescent markings flared softly, matching the shimmer of her dress. "And leave the galaxy to Vane? To the harmonization?" "No." She reached up and adjusted his collar, her thumb brushing his pulse. "Besides," she added, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, "you promised me a ship. We have to save the galaxy first so we can steal one." The door to the cabin slid open. Senator Era stood there. She was an older woman, human, with steel-gray hair pulled back into a severe knot and eyes that had seen too many administrations rise and fall to be impressed by anything. "You look adequate," Era said, her gaze sweeping over them. "The gala has begun. My clearance codes will get you past the outer perimeter. But once you are inside, you are on your own." Cade did not like Era. He could feel Lyria's distrust of her through the bond, a sour taste like spoiled milk. Era was a reformist, yes, but she was also a mathematician of politics. She calculated lives like currency. "Remember the plan," Era said. "You need to access the Chancellor's private server node. It is located in the maintenance sub-level directly beneath the ballroom. Plant the taps, then get out. I will broadcast the data during his speech." "And if we get caught?" Cade asked. "Then you are two rogue terrorists who kidnapped a senator," Era said smoothly. "And I will mourn you during my re-election campaign." "Charming," Cade said. Era stepped forward, handing Lyria a small, ornate clutch. "Your data spikes are in here. And Lyria?" "Yes, Senator, do not let your attachment compromise the mission. The soul blade is a tool. Use it. Do not let it use you." Lyria took the clutch. Her face was a mask of perfect porcelain indifference. "I know my duty. Senator, the Grand Summit Gala was a sensory assault. The ballroom was a floating platform suspended within the transparent dome of the orbital station, offering a panoramic view of the planet Aurelian below. The room was packed with the elite of 1,000 worlds, ambassadors in jeweled exoskeletons, trade barons in floating chairs, and high-ranking military officers in dress uniforms. The air smelled of expensive perfume, ozone, and the sweat of powerful people afraid of losing their power. Lyria and Cade entered at the top of the grand staircase. The announcer drone chimed softly. The Lady Lyria, guardian of the blade, and her companion. Heads turned. The whisper that ran through the room was audible. "The Blade Maiden, returning from the dead? And with a human?" Lyria descended the stairs. She did not walk. She glided. Every movement was calculated to project divine authority. Cade walked half a step behind her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. A possessive, protective gesture that was entirely against protocol and entirely necessary to keep him from tripping over his own feet. "Smile." Lyria's voice whispered in his mind. "You look like you are expecting an execution." "I am," Cade projected back. "See that guy in the red armor? That is a Krogan warlord. He is looking at me like I am an appetizer." "He is looking at you because you are walking on the wrong side," Lyria corrected. Move to my left. It is the position of the shield bearer. Cade shuffled to her left, nearly stepping on the train of her gown. Smooth, he thought. They reached the floor. A dense crowd parted for them, a mixture of awe and fear in their eyes. Lyria nodded regally to a passing duke, her face serene, while internally she was mapping the room, identifying exits, security cameras, and guard rotations. Cade felt her focus. It was intense, like looking through a sniper scope. But beneath it, he felt the flutter of her heart. She was terrified, not for herself, but for him. She was hyper-aware of every threat within a 10-meter radius of him. "May I have this dance?" Cade asked aloud, offering his hand as the orchestra began a slow, swelling waltz. It was part of the cover. They needed to move toward the service elevators on the far side of the room, and the dance floor was the only path through the throng. Lyria looked at him. For a second, the mask slipped. Her silver eyes softened. "You may," she said. He pulled her close. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his hand on her waist. The moment they touched, the bond flared. The noise of the gala fell away. Cade could smell the scent of her skin, rainwater and electric ozone. He could feel the warmth of her body through the thin silk of her dress. "You are trembling," Cade whispered, guiding her into a turn. "It is the sword," Lyria murmured, her lips barely moving. "It is reacting to the crowd. So many minds, so much ambition and fear. It is hungry. Focus on me," Cade said. "Just me. Ignore them." He spun her, his movement surprisingly graceful. "I did not know you could waltz," Lyria said, raising an eyebrow. "I have many hidden talents." Cade grinned. "I once charmed a diplomat's daughter into giving me the codes to her father's vault during a waltz just like this." Lyria felt a spike of jealousy through the bond. It was sharp and hot. "Did you kiss her?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Cade blinked, surprised by the intensity of the emotion coming from her. "No," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I only kiss women who try to stab me first. It is a niche preference." Lyria flushed, looking down. The banter was a shield, but it was getting thin. "Cade," she whispered, "if we do not make it out of here." "We will." Cade interrupted. He pulled her closer, breaking protocol, pressing her body against his. "But if we do not," Lyria persisted, "I want you to know. Part of me, a big part of me, wants to walk out that airlock right now. Just leave. Let Era save the galaxy. I want to go to that little ship you talked about." Cade's heart hammered against his ribs. He projected an image into her mind, a small, battered freighter drifting in a nebula, a cramped cockpit, 2 bunks pushed together. Peace. "It is a nice ship," he whispered. "Needs a new hyperdrive, but it has character." Lyria looked up at him, her eyes shining. "And the crew?" "Just you and me," Cade said. "And maybe Zoe, if we need someone to fix the toaster." They stared at each other, the gala forgotten. The longing between them was a physical force, a magnetic pull that threatened to fuse them right there on the dance floor. The soul blade, hidden beneath her skirt, pulsed in time with their heartbeats. A warm, golden rhythm. "Target is moving." Zoe's voice crackled in their earpieces, shattering the moment. "The Chancellor is heading to the podium. You have 10 minutes before the speech starts." Lyria stiffened. The mask slammed back into place. "Let us go," she said. They slipped away during a crescendo in the music, disappearing behind a heavy velvet curtain that led to the service corridors. The transition was jarring. One moment, they were in a world of gold and light. The next, they were in a narrow gray tunnel that smelled of lubricant and recycled air. The walls vibrated with the thrum of the station's massive engines. "This way," Cade said, checking the schematic Era had uploaded to his wrist comp. "The server node is down 2 levels." They moved quickly, Lyria gathering her skirts in one hand, her other hand resting on the hilt of the soul blade through the fabric. They reached a maintenance hatch. Cade knelt, pulling out a multi-tool. "Electronic lock," he muttered. "Give me 30 seconds. Lyria stood guard, watching the corridor. The space was tight. Cade was kneeling at her feet. She looked down at the back of his neck, the way his dark hair curled over his collar. She felt a wave of affection so strong it nearly knocked the wind out of her. "Cade," she said. "Got it," Cade said, the lock clicking open. He stood up, turning to face her. He was grinning, triumphant, that crooked, reckless grin that had gotten him into trouble on a dozen worlds. "We are good to go," he said. Lyria didn't speak. She grabbed the lapels of his velvet jacket and slammed him against the wall. "Hey!" Cade started. She kissed him. It was not gentle. It was frantic. It was a release of all the fear, the tension, the desire she had been suppressing for days. She kissed him like she wanted to breathe him in, to hide him inside her soul where the Chancellor and his armies couldn't touch him. Cade froze for a split second, then he melted. His arms went around her, pulling her crushed against him. He kissed her back with equal hunger, his hands tangling in her hair, messing up the intricate ceremonial braids. The corridor dissolved. The soul blade reacted. It did not just hum, it sang. A surge of golden energy erupted from the weapon, passing through Lyria and into Cade. The walls of the corridor seemed to warp. For a second, they were not on the station. They were floating in that starfield again, 2 souls wrapped around each other, burning with a light that defied the cold dark of space. Yes, the sword whispered. More. The lights in the corridor blew out. Sparks showered down from the ceiling. They broke apart, gasping, eyes wide. The emergency lighting flickered on, bathing them in pulsing red. "Okay," Cade wheezed, wiping his mouth. That was dangerous." Lyria finished, her chest heaving. She looked down. The hem of her dress was singed. The sword was vibrating so hard her leg was numb. "We just shorted out the local grid," Cade said, looking at the dead panel. Lyria leaned her forehead against his chest. "We have to focus. We cannot let the feelings take over." Cade laughed breathlessly. "Tell that to the sword. It seems to be a romantic." They planted the data taps in the server node. It took 3 minutes. 3 minutes of forced, agonizing silence where they tried not to look at each other, tried to dampen the roaring fire in their blood. "Done," Cade said, closing the panel. "Era is receiving the feed." Zoe's voice came over the comms again, but he sounded different, panicked. "Cade, Lyria, get out of there. It is a trap." "What?" Cade tapped his earpiece. "Zoe, repeat. It is Era," Zoe shouted. "I just decrypted a sublayer in her transmission. She is not just broadcasting the proof. She is planning to overload the Soulblade network." Lyria froze. "Explain." "The harmonization protocol uses the Soulblades as a conduit," Zoe explained rapidly. "Era has rigged the code to send a feedback spike through the bond. She is going to use the 2 of you as a living bomb to blow out the crown array and kill the Chancellor." "And us?" Cade asked, his blood running cold. "It will fry your neural cortexes instantly," Zoe said. "She considers you acceptable casualties." Lyria looked at Cade. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She had trusted Era. She had believed in the mission. "We have to abort," Lyria said. "We have to disconnect the taps." She reached for the panel. A heavy blast door slammed down between them. "Cade!" Lyria shouted. She was on one side. He was on the other. Cade hammered on the metal. Lyria, run! Vents in the ceiling above Cade hissed open. A gray gas began to flood the small compartment. Neural tether drones dropped from the ceiling, small, spider-like machines glowing with blue energy. They landed on Cade, their metallic legs digging into his suit. Get off! Cade yelled, thrashing. He swatted one away, but two more latched onto his arms. Lyria felt the sting, sharp, electric shocks that paralyzed his muscles. She felt his legs give out. She felt him hit the floor. No! Lyria screamed. She drew the soul blade. The violet gold light illuminated the corridor. She slashed at the blast door. The metal groaned, glowing white-hot, but it was reinforced with energy shields. It would not yield. Cade's voice in her mind was fading, drowning in a sea of static and pain. Lyria. Go. Trap. Then silence. The bond didn't break, but it went dark, like a hood had been thrown over his mind. Cade woke up in a chair. He couldn't move. Restraints made of hard light bound his wrists and ankles. A metal crown was clamped around his head, digging into his temples. He was in a circular room with white walls. One wall was a viewing window. Beyond it, he could see the gala. The dancers were still twirling, oblivious. Well, look who decided to join the party. Chancellor Vane stood in front of him. In person, he looked even more unimposing than on the hollows, a small, pale man with manicured hands. But his eyes were dead things. You are shorter in person, Cade rasped. His tongue felt thick. Vane smiled. He walked over to a console and tapped a key. The crown on Cade's head tightened. Cade screamed. It was not physical pain. It was soul pain. It felt like someone was reaching into his memories with a rusty spoon and scraping them out. Lyria, miles away in the ventilation shafts, fell to her knees, clutching her head, a silent scream tearing from her throat. Fascinating, Vane said, watching a monitor. The bond transmits the stimuli with 99% fidelity. I hurt you. She bleeds. Let her go. Cade gasped, sweat dripping from his nose. Vane chuckled. Let her go? My dear boy, she is the guest of honor. You are just the bait. He leaned in close, his cologne smelling of synthetic lilacs. Do you know why I chose you? Vane whispered. Because you are nobody. A broken soldier, a thief. You are the perfect disposable delivery system. I knew Lyria's conditioning was breaking. I needed something base to tempt her, to make her vulnerable. He patted Cade's cheek, and look how well it worked. She bonded to a human, a street rat. It is pathetic, really, but useful. Vane turned back to the console. The summit is about to harmonize, and thanks to your friend Era's clumsy attempt at sabotage, which we anticipated naturally, I now have the perfect frequency to burn out the resistance. I will use your bond to anchor the signal. He looked at Cade with contempt. When I am done, there will be no more wars, no more thieves, just peace. And you? You will be a husk. Lyria was crawling through a duct, tears streaming down her face. Every time Vane turned the dial, she felt Cade's agony. It was blinding. But through the pain, she heard Ira's voice on her private comm channel. Lyria, listen to me. Go to hell, Lyria hissed. You have to leave him, Era said. Her voice was cold, pragmatic. He is in the secure facility. You cannot breach it in time. The Chancellor is about to activate the array. You must get to the transmission tower and manually sever the link. And let him die? Lyria demanded. If you go to him, you both die, Era said, and the Chancellor wins. Cade is a soldier. He would want you to complete the mission. Lyria stopped moving. She hung there in the dark, the metal of the duct pressing against her. She felt Cade, He was fading. He was not afraid anymore. He was just sad. He was thinking about the little ship. He was thinking about her. He was resigning himself to being the disposable one, just like he always feared. No. The word rose up in Lyria like a tidal wave. She remembered the training. The blade is the mission. The wielder is the vessel. She remembered the archives. The duel are sustained. She remembered the kiss in the corridor. The feeling of being whole. I am not a soldier, Lyria said into the comms. What? Era asked. I am a guardian, Lyria said, and I do not trade lives. She ripped the earpiece out and crushed it. She kicked the grate out. She dropped into a service hallway. She drew the soul blade. The sword was screaming now, reflecting Cade's torture. The violet light was jagged, chaotic. Lyria closed her eyes. She took a breath. I am coming. She projected. She didn't run. She marched. 2 guards rounded the corner. Before they could raise their weapons, Lyria slashed the air. A wave of force threw them against the wall. She reached the security checkpoint for the lower levels. A heavy blast door barred the way. Lyria held the sword with both hands. Give me strength, she whispered. She thrust the blade forward. The spectral echoes appeared, not just vague shapes this time. She saw them clearly. A warrior in ancient iron, a scholar in robes, a child who had died too young. They stood behind her. They placed their ghostly hands on hers. The soul blade turned white. Lyria drove it into the blast door. The metal screamed. Molten steel sprayed outward. She carved a circle in the 3-foot-thick durasteel and kicked it in. She stepped through the smoking hole. The alarm in the interrogation room blared. Vane looked up, annoyed. What is that? The door to the room did not open. It disintegrated. Dust and smoke billowed in. Through the haze, a figure emerged. Lyria's gown was torn. Her hair was wild. Her markings were glowing so brightly they illuminated the room in stark blue light. In her hand, the soul blade was a pillar of white fire. Vane's guards opened fire. Lyria did not slow down. She deflected the bolts with the sword, moving with a speed that was impossible for a biological being. She was a blur of vengeance. She cut the first guard's rifle in half. She silenced the second with a hilt strike to the temple. Vane backed away, his composure shattering. Stop her, he shrieked. Lyria ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the chair. On Cade. She reached the console. She didn't bother with hacking. She slashed the control panel in half. Sparks showered the room. The hard light restraints flickered and died. The crown released Cade's head. He slumped forward. Lyria dropped the sword. It clattered to the floor, still humming. She caught Cade before he hit the ground. Cade. Cade, look at me. He blinked. His eyes were unfocused, bloodshot. He looked at her, then at the smoking ruin of the room. You, he rasped. His voice was a wreck. You made a dramatic entrance. Lyria laughed. It was a sob. I told you, she said, cradling his face. I do not run away after breakfast. Cade managed a weak, crooked smile. It is almost dinner time. Vane had retreated to the far door, surrounded by a fresh squad of elite troopers. You have saved nothing, Vane shouted, his voice shrill. The harmonization has already begun. The signal is locked. You will die here, together. Lyria looked at Vane. Then she looked down at Cade. She felt the bond. It was battered, bruised, but it was still there, and it was stronger than before, because now there was no doubt, no hesitation. She loved him, and he loved her. Can you stand? Lyria asked softly. For you? Cade grunted, forcing himself upright, leaning heavily on her. I can fly. Lyria picked up the soul blade. She offered the hilt to him. Together, she said. Cade wrapped his hand around hers on the hilt. The pain vanished. The exhaustion vanished. They stood up, two broken people holding a weapon that could eat gods. "Let us go save the galaxy," Cade said. "So we can get that ship," Lyria finished. They turned toward Vane. The Chancellor flinched. "Run," Cade suggested. Vane ran. The escape from the capital was a blur of frantic navigation and terrifying silence. Joe piloted the stolen extraction shuttle with white-knuckled precision, weaving through the orbital traffic lanes like a needle through heavy fabric, until the glittering lights of Aurelian faded into the black below. They did not speak for a long time. The destination Zoe had chosen was a moon called Theris, a frozen, dead world in the outer orbit of the system. It was a place of jagged ice spires and abandoned atmospheric domes, relics of a terraforming project that had run out of funding 2 centuries ago. It was a ghost world, wrapped in eternal twilight, illuminated only by the pale, reflected glow of the planet it circled. When they landed inside the cracked shell of Dome 4, the engines powered down with a dying whine. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing in against the hull. Cade unbuckled his harness. His hands were shaking. He looked across the small cabin at Lyria. She was sitting perfectly still, her eyes closed, as the bioluminescent markings on her skin, usually a vibrant, living blue, were dim. They flickered like a failing power grid. Her skin was the color of ash. "Lyria?" Cade asked, his voice cracking. She opened her eyes. They were dull. The silver iris clouded. "I am here," she whispered. But she wasn't. Not really. Through the bond that linked their souls, Cade felt a terrifying emptiness. It was a sensation of erosion, as if the tide of the soul blade's power had washed away the shoreline of her spirit, leaving only bedrock and sand. Every time she had used the weapon to save him, to break the doors, to fight Vane's guards, it had taken a piece of her. He unbuckled her restraints and helped her stand. She stumbled, her weight heavy against him. She felt frail, something he had never associated with the Blade Maiden. "We need heat," Cade said to Zoe, "and atmosphere. The dome still has emergency life support," Zoe said, typing rapidly on his datapad. "I am tapping into the geothermal vents. It will not be tropical, but it will keep the oxygen flowing." Cade nodded. He wrapped his arm around Lyria's waist, half carrying her down the ramp onto the frosted floor of the dome. The space was cavernous, a rusted cathedral of industry. Twisted metal girders reached up toward the transparent ceiling, where the stars and the massive curve of Aurelian hung in the dark. The air was frigid, biting at their exposed skin. They found a sheltered alcove near the central vent, where the geothermal heat was strongest. Cade laid out their few scavenged blankets on the metal grating. He sat Lyria down, wrapping her tightly. She shivered, her teeth chattering. "It is cold, Cade." "Why is it so cold?" "It is the drain," Cade said, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "The sword, it took too much." He sat beside her, pulling her into his arms, trying to share his body heat. The soul blade lay a few feet away, wrapped in a piece of thermal cloth. Even sheathed, it radiated a low, hungry pressure. Cade hated it. He wanted to pick it up and throw it into the nearest ravine. "We should have kept running," Cade said into her hair. "We should not have stopped at this moon. We should have jumped to the rim." "We could not," Lyria murmured. "The nav computer needed to cycle. I do not mean the computer. Lyria, I mean us. We should have left the system. To hell with the summit. To hell with the Chancellor." Lyria pulled back slightly, looking at him. Her eyes were weary, but there was a spark of her old stubbornness in them. "We cannot leave." Cade, you know that. I know that you are dying, Cade snapped. The anger erupted out of him, sudden and hot. He stood up, pacing the small space of the alcove. His boots rang against the metal floor. I can feel you fading. Lyria, it is like holding on to smoke. Every time you touch that thing, you get smaller. And for what? For a galaxy that treats you like a battery? For a council that was ready to lobotomize you? It is not for the council, Lyria said softly. Then who? For the people? The faceless millions who will never know your name? Cade stopped, turning to face her. He pointed a finger at his own chest. What about me? You saved me. Lyria, you burned your own soul to knit my bones back together. Was that just so I could watch you wither away in a frozen wasteland? He was shouting now, his voice echoing off the curved walls of the dome. Zoe, working on the environmental controls in the distance, pretended not to hear. Lyria stood up. She swayed, but she held her ground. She let the blanket fall from her shoulders. Do not dare, she said, her voice gaining strength from her anger. Do not dare make this about your guilt. Cade. My guilt? Cade laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. I am the expert on guilt, princess. I have carried it for 10 years. I watched my squad die because I followed orders. I watched my home colony burn because I was not fast enough. I am not going to add you to the list of ghosts that haunt me at 3 a.m. So you would choose to run? Lyria challenged, stepping closer. You would choose to let Vayne activate the crown array? You would let him enslave billions of minds, strip away their free will just so you can keep me in a jar like a prize? I would burn the galaxy to ash if it meant you survived, Cade yelled. The confession hung in the freezing air between them. Cade stood there, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He had said it. The thing he had been terrified to admit even to himself. He was selfish. He was desperate. He was not a hero. He was a terrified man in love with a woman who was trying to be a martyr. Lyria stared at him. The anger drained out of her face, replaced by a profound sadness. I know, she whispered. I can feel it, your fear. It is so loud, Cade. It drowns out everything else. She took a step toward him. But I cannot live like that. I cannot be the woman who ran away while the universe ended. If I did that, if I chose my own happiness over the freedom of every soul on Aurelian, I would cease to be Lyria. I would just be another broken thing you carry around. She reached out, her hand hovering over his heart. And I am terrified too. Cade. He looked at her, startled. You are the Blade Maiden. You do not get scared. I am terrified all the time, she admitted. Her voice trembled. I am terrified that I am nothing without the sword. I have been a weapon since I was 6 years old. I do not know how to be a person. I do not know how to be yours. Cade caught her hand. He pressed it against his chest. You are not a weapon, he said fiercely. You are the woman who likes spiced noodles. You are the woman who laughs when I trip over my own feet. You are the woman who saved my life in a scanner booth because you refused to let me be taken. Lyria's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at their joined hands. We are both so broken, she whispered. Yeah, Cade said, his voice breaking. We are a matching set. He pulled her into a hug. This time, it wasn't about heat. It was about holding her together. They stood there in the freezing dome, 2 tiny specks of warmth in a graveyard of ambition. Eventually, they sank to the floor, exhausted. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their backs against a rusted crate, looking out at the pale ring light filtering through the dirty glass. Tell me about the ship, Lyria said quietly. Cade closed his eyes. He let out a long breath. "It is a light freighter," he said. "A Kestrel class, old, but reliable. The hull is painted matte gray to avoid scanners. The engines hum in B-flat." "B-flat?" Lyria asked, a hint of a smile in her voice. "It is a soothing key," Cade insisted. "There is a pilot's chair that actually reclines, and a galley that smells like coffee and engine grease. And where would we go? Anywhere. The Rim. The nebula of lost souls. There is a moon in the Vega system where the oceans are made of liquid neon. We could sit on the beach and drink something with an umbrella in it." Lyria laughed softly. "I do not think I would be good at sitting on a beach. I would probably try to organize the sand." "We would find you a hobby," Cade said. "You could learn to fix the hyperdrive, or you could just you could sleep until noon." "Sleep until noon," Lyria repeated. The concept sounded more alien to her than the landscape outside. "And we would argue," Cade added. "Oh, definitely," Lyria agreed. "You leave your socks everywhere. I have seen the inside of your duffel bag. It is a disaster zone. It is organized chaos," Cade defended. "And you? You hum when you are thinking. It is very distracting." "I do not hum." "You absolutely hum? It is cute." "Annoying, but cute." They fell silent again. The fantasy hung in the air, shimmering and fragile. It was a beautiful lie. They both knew that Vane was charging the crown array. They both knew that in 12 hours, there would be no freedom, no ships, no neon oceans. Unless... Lyria sat up straighter. She looked at the soul blade. "There is a way," she said. Her voice was hesitant, testing the weight of the words. "A way to stop the array?" Cade asked. "A way to stop the drain," Lyria said. "To change the nature of the bond." She turned to face him. The ancient texts in the Hall of Echoes, the ones about the dual wielders. I remembered something else, something I did not want to say because it frightened me. "What?" "It is called the reversal right," Lyria said. "The soul blade was created to consume. It takes the soul of the wielder to power its connection to the void. That is why it kills us. That is why I am fading. I am feeding it. And the right, it reverses the flow. Instead of the sword taking from us, we give to each other. We open the bond completely, so no barriers and no secrets. We create a circuit between our two souls, a loop of energy that sustains itself. The sword becomes the conduit, not the consumer." Cade looked at her. "That sounds intense. It is dangerous," Lyria said. "It requires absolute vulnerability." "Cade, if we do this, there is no hiding. I will see everything you are, your darkest memories, your shame, your fear, and you will see mine. If there is any hesitation, any rejection, the feedback will kill us both instantly." Cade looked at the sword, then back at Lyria. He thought about the shame he carried, the things he had done in the war, the thief he had become, the deep, gnawing belief that he was unlovable. He looked at Lyria. He saw the same fear in her eyes, the fear that if he truly saw her, the weapon, the monster, the broken child, he would turn away. "I do not care about the tactical advantage," Cade said quietly. Lyria blinked. "What?" "I do not want to do this because it will power up the sword," Cade said. "I want to do this because I want you." He reached out and cupped her face. His thumb brushed over the fading bioluminescence on her cheek. "I want all of it, Lyria, the scars, the power, the stubbornness, the humming. I want to know you better than I know myself. And I promise you, whatever I see in there, I will never look away. I will never see you as just a weapon." Lyria let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 20 years. A tear slipped down her cheek, hot against the cold air. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let us do it." They began to prepare the dome. It felt absurdly domestic and terrifyingly sacred all at once. Cade scavenged a canister of old ship fuel, a thick, viscous gel that glowed faintly green. Under Lyria's instruction, he drew a circle on the metal floor, inscribing ancient sigils of binding and release. "This is not exactly how I pictured our first night together," Cade joked, his voice shaking slightly as he finished the last rune. "Industrial solvent fumes and sub-zero temperatures. Very romantic." "It beats a jail cell," Lyria said. She was arranging a set of harmonic resonators Zoe had pulled from the shuttle's engine. She placed them at the cardinal points of the circle. They placed the soul blade in the center. It lay on the bare metal, looking innocuous and lethal. Lyria stepped into the circle. She held out her hand to Cade. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," Cade admitted. He stepped in and took her hand. "But I am with you." They sat down, facing each other, knees touching. The soul blade lay between them. "Close your eyes," Lyria instructed. "Focus on the bond. Do not push it away. Pull it in. Open the door. Cade, take the lock off." Cade closed his eyes. He breathed in the smell of fuel and ozone. He felt Lyria's hands in his, cold, calloused, strong. He found the place in his mind where the bond lived. It was usually a frightening thing, a pressure he tried to ignore. Now, he approached it. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. He imagined stepping off. "I am here," he projected. "I am here," Lyria answered. The world dropped away. It was not a vision this time. It was an immersion. Cade gasped as the barriers dissolved. He was suddenly flooded with Lyria. He felt the cold stone of the temple floor under his knees. He felt the weight of expectations crushing his chest. He felt the loneliness of a child watching other children play from behind a glass wall. He felt the terror of the sword, the constant gnawing hunger that had been her companion for a decade. But he also felt her strength. He felt the fierce, diamond-hard discipline she had built. He felt her love for the beauty of the auroras. He felt the moment she first saw him crashing through the ceiling, not anger, but a spark of desperate hope. She was vast. She was a universe of repressed light, waiting to explode. And Lyria felt him. She felt the gnawing hunger of poverty in the Undercity. She felt the shame of the war, the smell of burning villages that still woke him up sweating. She felt the way he used humor as armor, layering jokes over wounds so no one would see how much he hurt. She felt his awe of her. It was overwhelming, and he didn't see a monster. He saw a star. He loved her with a desperate, terrified intensity that made her spirit tremble. There was no judgment. There was only recognition. "I see you," Cade thought. "I see you," Lyria echoed. They did not pull away. They leaned in. They let the currents of their souls mix. The fear dissolved, replaced by a rush of pure, unadulterated trust. It was more intimate than any touch, more naked than any physical act. It was the weaving together of two isolated threads into a rope that could hold the weight of the world. Between them, the soul blade began to change. The harsh, violent violet light softened. The screaming hunger in the back of their minds went quiet. A new sound filled the dome, a deep, resonant thrum. The light shifted. It turned gold, warm, liquid gold. It was no longer feeding on them. It was resonating with them. It was amplifying the loop of their connection. Cade opened his eyes. The dome was bathed in golden light. The sigils on the floor were glowing. The soul blade was levitating inches off the ground, rotating slowly. Lyria opened her eyes. Her markings were back, but they weren't blue anymore. They were gold, pulsing in time with the sword. Hi, Cade whispered. Hi, Lyria smiled. She leaned forward. They kissed. It was slow, deep, and steady. It was the seal on the pact. The bond hummed, smooth and effortless. It felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. Later, they lay together under the pile of blankets, their bodies tangled for warmth. The soul blade sat nearby, quiet as a sleeping pet. The golden light had dimmed to a soft amber, just enough to see each other's faces. Cade traced the line of Lyria's spine with his hand. I feel different, he murmured. Lighter. It is because you are not carrying it alone anymore, Lyria said. She rested her head on his chest, and neither am I. She sounded drowsy, but peaceful. The hollow feeling was gone. She felt full, replenished. Cade, she said, yeah, if we die tomorrow? We are not going to die, Cade interrupted gently. But if we do? Lyria persisted. It was worth it. This moment, choosing this, it was worth it. Cade kissed the top of her head. He tightened his arms around her. Love does not erase the fear, does it? He asked. No, Lyria said. But it gives the fear a purpose. It makes the risk meaningful. Autonomy, Cade mused. I always thought it meant being alone, being free from everyone. But it is not. It is choosing who you are willing to sacrifice for, and choosing to do it together. Lyria lifted her head to look at him. That was almost poetic. I think the bond is making you smarter. Hey, I was always smart. I just hid it well. They lay there for a while longer, savoring the warmth, the silence, the simple miracle of existing in the same space without pain. The silence was broken by the sound of running footsteps. Zoe skidded into the alcove, his breath misting in the cold air. He looked frantic. I hate to interrupt the honeymoon, Zoe panted. But we have a problem, a massive problem. Cade sat up, keeping one arm around Lyria. What is it, Zoe? The summit, Zoe said. I just intercepted a broadcast. The Chancellor has moved the schedule up again. He is not waiting for the morning. He is starting the ceremony now. Now? Lyria sat up, the blanket falling away. But the delegates? They are all there, Zoe said. And the energy readings from the capital. Look, he pointed up at the transparent ceiling of the dome. Through the grime and frost, they could see the planet Aurelian hanging above them. Usually the planet's dark side was a tapestry of city lights. But now, the northern hemisphere was dominated by a swirling vortex of unnatural light. Ribbons of violet and sickly green energy were arching up from the surface, reaching toward the orbital station like grasping fingers. The crown array, Lyria whispered. It is charging. Zoe nodded grimly. The spikes are off the charts. If he activates that thing, it will not just harmonize the delegates. The backlash will fry the free will of anyone in the system within the hour. Cade looked at the sky. He looked at Lyria. The peaceful moment in the blanket fort was over. The universe was calling in its debts. He stood up and offered a hand to Lyria. Time to go to work, he said. Lyria took his hand. She pulled herself up. She looked different now. The fragility was gone. She stood with a grounded, terrifying calm. Her golden markings glowed steady and bright. She walked over to the soul blade. She picked it up. The sword hummed, turning a brilliant, resolute gold in her hand. She offered the hilt to Cade. He wrapped his fingers around hers. The bond flared, not a spike, but a surge of shared strength. They moved as one entity, two bodies driven by a single will. They began to gear up. The movements were efficient, silent. Cade checked his pistol. Lyria adjusted her bracers. He paused to tighten a strap on her armor. She paused to brush a speck of dust from his jacket. A squeeze of the hand, a forehead pressed briefly against a shoulder. These small touches carried more weight than all the speeches in the galaxy. They were promises. I am here. I have you. Zoe watched them, shaking his head. You two are insane, the Veridon muttered. We are flying into a meat grinder. Cade grinned. It was not the cocky grin of the thief. It was the dangerous smile of a man who had something worth fighting for. Start the ship, Zoe, Cade said. Lyria looked at Cade. We are not coming back from this, are we? Not all the way. Cade looked at the sky, then back at her. We are not going to let the universe turn us into a tragedy. Lyria, if we fall with our eyes open, and our souls joined. Lyria finished. They walked toward the shuttle, the golden light of the sword cutting a path through the frozen dark. They were flying toward an unwritten future, and for the first time, neither of them was afraid of the end. The grand summit was a spectacle of light and lies, suspended in the geostationary orbit above Aurelian. The summit hall was a marvel of transparent aluminum and gold filigree, a floating palace designed to intimidate as much as to host. Inside, the air was perfumed with rare scents from a dozen worlds, and the floor was crowded with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Senators in velvet robes rubbed shoulders with trade barons in levitating chairs, all of them gazing up at the massive holographic projection that dominated the center of the dome. It showed the crown array. In the projection, it was a benevolent net of blue light, a shield that would wrap the Alliance in eternal safety. Beneath the floor, deep in the station's engineering bowels, the reality was a different color entirely. It was green, sickly, radioactive green, Lyria, Cade. And Zoe moved through a maintenance conduit that ran parallel to the station's main power spine. The heat was oppressive, and the noise was a constant, tooth-rattling thrum. Cade wiped sweat from his eyes. He checked the soul blade, which was strapped to Lyria's back. It was vibrating, pulling her forward like a lodestone seeking north. It knows where the others are, Lyria whispered. Her voice was steady, but Cade could feel the tension radiating from her through the golden hum of their bond. She was sensing something he could not, a chorus of faint, terrified whispers. They are close, she said. Zoe tapped his wrist comp, his Veridon eyes darting nervously in the gloom. I have tapped into the internal sensors. The Chancellor is on the stage. He has accelerated the timeline again. He is not making a speech. He is initiating the protocol in 3 minutes. Then we move faster, Cade said. They reached a heavy blast door marked with high-level radiation warnings. Lyria didn't bother with the keypad. She placed her hand on the metal. The soul blade flared gold, and the locking mechanism melted, the heavy bolts sliding back with a groan of surrendered steel. They stepped through. Cade stopped, his breath caught in his throat. They were in a cathedral of nightmares. The chamber was vast, stretching up into the darkness. Rows of crystalline pillars lined the walkway, hundreds of them, humming with energy. Inside each pillar floated a core, a shard of black glass identical to the original form of the soul blade. But they were not empty. Inside each shard, trapped in a suspension field of torment, was a consciousness. Cade could see them, swirling, smoky shapes that beat against the glass. Silent screams etched into the very air of the room. The soul blade on Lyria's back began to sing a high, mourning note. These are the missing, Lyria said, her voice trembling with horror. The dissidents, the prisoners, the wielders who vanished. He did not kill them. He harvested them. She walked toward the nearest pillar. She reached out, and Cade felt the wave of grief hit her. It was physical, a blow to the chest. "Don't," Cade said, grabbing her hand. "We cannot save them one by one. There is no time. I can hear them. Cade," she whispered. "They are cold." Zoe ran to a console near the edge of the walkway. "I am into the system. The feed is live. I can broadcast whatever happens in this room to the screens upstairs. But the encryption on the array itself, it is too dense. I cannot shut it down from here." "We do not need to shut it down," Cade said, drawing his pistol. "We just need to break it." A slow clapping sound echoed from the far end of the chamber. From a secure elevator platform, Chancellor Vane descended. He was flanked by 6 members of the elite guard, their armor gleaming in the sickly light of the pillars. Vane looked immaculate. His robes were pristine, his expression one of bored disappointment. "I expected you sooner," Vane said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. "But I suppose a thief and a traitor can only move so fast." He stepped off the platform, walking casually among the pillars of trapped souls. "Look at them," Vane said, gesturing to the tormented spirits. "You see horror. I see efficiency. The galaxy is a messy place. Lyria. Too many voices. Too many conflicting desires. It creates friction, war, chaos." He stopped, looking at her with cold, dead eyes. "These souls provide the processing power to smooth out the friction. When I activate the array, I will not be enslaving minds. I will be harmonizing them. Imagine it. A galaxy that breathes as one. No more conflict. No more pain. Just order. Order built on graves." Lyria spat. She drew the soul blade. The golden light cut through the gloom, making the guards step back nervously. Vane laughed. "You still think in such small terms. You squandered your potential. Lyria, you could have been the keystone of this temple. Instead, you bonded with that." He pointed a manicured finger at Cade. "The human contamination." Vane sneered. "A broken soldier who thinks he is a hero. You broke a perfect system. Lyria, you introduced chaos into a pristine equation." Cade stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You call it chaos," Cade said. "I call it life. You are terrified of it, aren't you? That is why you built this place. You are so scared of anything you cannot control that you would rather turn the universe into a spreadsheet than let people make their own mistakes." "It is cowardice," Cade finished, his voice hard as iron. "You are just a coward dressed up as a god." Vane's face twitched. The mask of civility cracked. "Kill them," Vane ordered. The guards raised their weapons. "Now," Cade shouted. Zoe slammed his hand onto the console. Above them, in the summit hall, the massive holographic projection of the shield flickered and died, replaced by a grainy live feed of the chamber below. Every delegate, every king and ambassador suddenly saw the truth. They saw the pillars. They saw the trapped souls. And they saw their chancellor ordering the execution of the Blade Maiden. Gasps rippled through the hall above. Down below, the battle erupted. The guards fired. Lyria moved. She was not fighting alone anymore. She was fighting with Cade. The bond they had forged in the ice dome was a live circuit. She saw what he saw. He felt what she felt. Cade slid across the floor, firing his pistol at the knee joints of the guards, while Lyria deflected the heavy plasma bolts with the soul blade. She spun, the golden blade leaving trails of light in the air, slicing through the barrels of the enemy rifles. Vane ignored the fight. He ran to the central control dais. He slammed his hand onto a biometric scanner. "Initiate harmonization," he screamed. "Override all safety protocols." The chamber shook. The humming of the pillars rose to a deafening shriek. Above them, the station's external emitters fired. A wave of invisible energy washed over the summit hall. Delegates clutched their heads, screaming as the crown array forced its way into their neural pathways. Their eyes began to glow with the same sickly green light as the pillars. "It is starting!" Zoe yelled over the noise. "I cannot stop it." The signal is self-sustaining. Lyria and Cade stood back to back in the center of the walkway. The guards were down, but the air itself was turning against them. The pressure of the array was immense. "Cade," Lyria said, her voice echoing in his mind. "We have to redirect it." "How?" Cade asked, firing a shot at Vane that deflected off the Chancellor's personal energy shield. "The network is built on souls," Lyria said. "It is expecting resistance. It is designed to crush individual wills. But it is not designed for this." She grabbed his hand. "It is not designed for us." She dropped her mental shields. She pulled on the bond, not gently but with everything she had. Cade understood. They couldn't fight the ocean, they had to change the current. He holstered his pistol. He grabbed the hilt of the soul blade with his free hand. They held the weapon together, two hands wrapped around the white leather grip. They closed their eyes. Push, Cade thought. They poured their souls into the blade, but they didn't aim it at Vane. They aimed it at the network itself. They pushed their love, their trust, their chaotic, messy, defiant connection into the crown array. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The soul blade acted as a lightning rod. The green energy of the pillars arced toward them, drawn by the intense gravity of their bond. But instead of crushing them, the energy hit the golden light of their shared soul and refracted. The world dissolved. Cade and Lyria were no longer in the chamber. They were standing in a void. It was a star field, but the stars were shaped like sword points. The ground beneath them was made of glass. They were holding on to each other, the only solid things in a universe of rushing wind. "Where are we?" Cade asked, his thought voice echoing. "We are inside the array," Lyria answered. "This is the control interface, not it is somebody abstract." Around them, the darkness howled. The will of the Chancellor was here, a massive, suffocating weight trying to grind them into dust. "You cannot stop progress," Vane's voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. "Surrender, become part of the whole." The pressure increased. Cade felt his memories fraying. He forgot the name of his first ship. He forgot the color of the sky on his homeworld. Lyria gripped him tighter. "Stay with me." She looked at the center of the storm. There was a singularity there, a black hole that was sucking in the energy of the millions of minds above. "We need to reverse the polarity," Lyria realized. "We need to turn the suction into a broadcast. But someone has to hold the door open." She looked at Cade. Her silver eyes were filled with a terrible resolve. "The mechanism requires an anchor," she said. "One soul has to stay here in the stream, to keep the channel open while the energy releases. If we let go, the backlash kills everyone." Cade felt ice in his veins. "An anchor? You mean a sacrifice?" "It has to be me," Lyria said. "I am the maiden. I was trained for this. I can hold the line." "No," Cade said. "Cade, please. There is no choice." "There is always a choice," Cade shouted in the mind space. "I did not come this far to let you become a statue in a park. I cannot live in a world that exists because you died." "And I cannot live if you die," Lyria shouted back. They were stuck. The binary logic of the soul blade, the logic of the Chancellor demanded a trade, one life for the many. The hero dies, so the world turns. Cade looked at the swirling darkness. He looked at the trapped lights drifting past them, the souls of the prisoners, the dissidents, the forgotten wielders. He realized something. "Lyria," he said, "why are we trying to do this alone?" What? The Chancellor thinks power is about one person controlling everything, Cade said. The Soul Blade used to think power was about one person eating another, but we changed the rules. He gestured to the drifting lights. We are not alone here. There are thousands of them. Why are we trying to be the solitary heroes? Lyria looked at the lights. She understood. Community, she whispered. She didn't push Cade away. She didn't step forward to sacrifice herself. She reached out with her mind. She didn't command. She invited. Brothers. She projected. Sisters. Forgotten ones. We are breaking the cage, but the door is heavy. Help us. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a light flickered. Then another. A figure materialized from the darkness. An old man in rags. Then a young woman in a flight suit. Then a warrior in ancient armor. The souls of the harvested. The victims of Vane's perfect order. They didn't attack. They moved toward Lyria and Cade. They placed spectral hands on their shoulders, on their backs. We are here. 1,000 voices whispered at once. Cade felt a surge of strength that defied description. It was not the raw power of a weapon. It was the unshakable weight of a crowd standing its ground. Together, Cade thought. Together. The chorus answered. Lyria and Cade, supported by the army of the dead, pushed back against the darkness. They didn't need an anchor. They became a chain. The singularity reversed. In the physical world, the reaction was cataclysmic. The green light in the chamber turned blinding white. The pillars shattered. The crown array didn't just turn off. It vomited its stolen power back out. On the summit floor above, the delegates gasped as the pressure in their minds vanished. The green glow left their eyes. And then, every screen in the hall, every datapad, every hollow emitter blasted the truth. Zoe's hack rode the energy wave, the footage of the soul pillars, the audio of Vane's confession, the logs of the harvested victims. It was broadcast to every ship in orbit, every terminal on the planet below. In the chamber, Vane was thrown backward by the explosion of the control dais. He scrambled to his feet, his robes scorched, his face a mask of absolute madness. "No!" he shrieked. "You cannot! It is my world! Mine!" He pulled a weapon from his robes, a disruptor pistol. He didn't aim at Cade. He aimed at Lyria's back as she stood amidst the shattering glass. Cade moved. But this time, Lyria moved with him. They didn't speak. They spun in perfect unison. The Soul Blade was humming a song of victory. Cade deflected the shot with his own pistol, the bullet sparking off the barrel. Lyria stepped through the opening. She didn't kill him. She swung the Soul Blade in a precise surgical arc. The golden blade sliced through the personal control circlet Vane wore on his wrist, the device that linked him to the station's defenses. The feedback loop shorted out his neural interface. Vane collapsed, convulsing as his stolen power drained away into the floor. He was left whimpering, a small, pathetic man in ruined velvet, surrounded by the shards of his broken empire. Silence fell over the chamber. The pillars were dark. The souls were gone, released into the ether, finally free. "We did it," Cade breathed, leaning against Lyria. Lyria looked at the Soul Blade. The golden light faded to a soft, contented pulse. "We didn't do it," she corrected. "We all did. Above them, the station was in chaos. Security teams were rushing the floor, but not to arrest the intruders. They were arresting the Chancellor's loyalists." Era's voice crackled over the station-wide address system. Her voice was shaken, but firm. "Security. Secure the Chancellor. The summit is suspended. We have much to answer for." Cade looked at the ceiling. Era found her conscience. Better late than never. Lyria sheathed the sword. The click was the loudest sound in the room. We should go, she said, before they decide they need a new hero to pin medals on, or a new scapegoat to blame. You do not want to stay for the after-party? Cade asked, holstering his pistol. I hear the hors d'oeuvres are expensive. Lyria looked at him. She looked at the wreckage. She looked at the freedom in his eyes. I think I am done with parties, she said. Getting out was easier than getting in. The chaos was absolute. Zoe met them at the maintenance airlock, looking smug and terrified in equal measure. I have a ship, Zoe said. Not the diplomatic shuttle. I found something. Inconspicuous. Cade looked at the vessel. It was a battered gray freighter with a patched hull and an engine that sounded like it had a persistent cough. It is beautiful, Cade said. Zoe stayed behind. I have to make sure Era does not spin this into a victory for her party, the Veridon said. Someone has to watch the bureaucrats. I will keep them honest, or at least honestly confused. Take care of yourself. Zoe, Lyria said, resting a hand on his shoulder. You too, Blade Maiden, Zoe said. Then he looked at Cade. Try not to crash it. Thief, I am a pilot now, Cade protested. They boarded the ship. The airlock hissed shut, sealing out the noise of politics, the demands of the council, and the weight of history. Minutes later, they were drifting away from the station, just another piece of traffic in the confused swarm leaving orbit. Cade sat in the pilot's seat. It reclined, just like he had promised. He began to punch in coordinates. Lyria sat in the co-pilot's chair. She had the soul blade across her knees. She ran her hand along the scabbard. It was quiet. For the first time in her life, the weapon was just a weapon. It didn't crave, it didn't whisper, none, it just sat there, waiting. Where are we going? Lyria asked. Cade finished the sequence. The nav computer beeped. Vega system, he said. I hear the neon oceans are nice this time of year. Lyria looked out the viewport as the stars stretched into lines of light. The summit was a shrinking speck of gold behind them. She felt the bond in her mind. It was a warm, steady presence. She could feel Cade's relief, his exhaustion, and the deep, abiding love that anchored her to the universe more than any duty ever could. We learned something, didn't we? Lyria murmured. Cade swiveled his chair to face her. What is that? That love is not about consumption, she said. The council, the sword, vain. They all thought power meant taking something from someone else, taking their will, taking their soul. She touched Cade's hand. But we survived because we shared. We gave it away. Power without consent is theft. Cade agreed. Power with love, that is just healing. He stood up and stretched, his joints popping. Speaking of healing, I am going to need about 3 days of sleep, and maybe a sandwich. He reached for the soul blade on her lap. Let me put that in the locker. You do not want to sleep with a legendary superweapon on your lap. It is bad for your posture. Lyria watched his hand approach. She arched a brow. The corner of her mouth twitched up. Don't touch my sword, she said, her voice dropping to that melodic, dangerous tone she had used the first night they met. It takes its wielder's soul. Cade froze. He looked at her. Then he grinned. It was the same reckless, charming grin, but the shadows behind it were gone. He stepped closer. He didn't pull his hand back. He wrapped his fingers around the hilt, covering her hand with his own. The sword hummed, a soft, happy sound. Good thing you are stuck with me, then, Cade said. He leaned down. Their foreheads rested together. They stayed there for a moment, breathing in the silence of the ship, two souls bound by choice, not by chains. Engage, Lyria whispered. Cade reached out and pushed the lever. The stars blurred. The ship jumped. They vanished into the unwritten dark, leaving the legends behind to write a story that belonged only to them.